Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. I never believed in the stories they told about Boundary Waters until what happened to me out there. My name is Michael Williams, I'm 32 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. Sarah and I had been planning this RV trip for months. After 3 years together, we thought we knew each other completely. She was methodical, always researching, always prepared. I was the spontaneous one, the one who said, "Let's just go," when she wanted to plan every detail. It worked for us, that balance. Or it did, until we drove our rented Winnebago into the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northern Minnesota. "Look at this," Sarah said, spreading maps across the RV's small dinette table as we pulled into the campground at dusk. "We can take the Moose Lake Trail tomorrow, maybe see some wildlife." Her dark hair caught the last rays of sunlight streaming through the window, and she looked so alive, so excited. I wish I could remember her that way more often now, instead of how she looked when she came back from the woods. The RV park sat on the edge of Superior National Forest, a dozen scattered sites among towering pines and paper birch trees. We'd gotten one of the last spots, tucked back against the tree line where the forest pressed close enough that branches scraped our roof when the wind picked up. The nearest neighbor was maybe 50 yards away, an elderly couple in a tiny travel trailer who'd nodded politely when we pulled in. "This is perfect," I said, wrapping my arms around Sarah's waist from behind as she studied the maps. "Just us, the wilderness, no cell service, no work emails." She leaned back against me. No distractions. That first night, everything felt magical. We grilled steaks on the campground's fire ring, opened a bottle of wine, and talked about maybe getting married next year. The darkness that settled over the forest was complete. No city lights, no street lamps, just the warm glow of our campfire and the endless black between the trees. Sarah kept glancing toward the woods. "It's so quiet," she whispered around midnight as we prepared for bed. "That's the point, babe." But she was right. Even the insects seemed muted, and there was no wind. The silence felt heavy, expectant. I noticed it too, but didn't want to admit it. When you grow up in the suburbs like I did, real wilderness quiet feels wrong somehow. Your brain keeps waiting for traffic sounds, air conditioners, the hum of civilization. We climbed into the RV's queen bed above the cab, but Sarah tossed and turned for hours. I finally drifted off around 2 a.m. to the sound of her breathing beside me. I woke to Sarah shaking my shoulder. Pale morning light filtered through the small windows, and she was already dressed in hiking clothes. "The campfire's lit," she said quietly. "What?" "Our campfire. It's burning again." I pulled on shorts and a t-shirt and followed her outside. Sure enough, flames danced in the metal ring where we'd carefully extinguished our fire the night before. Not just glowing embers, actual flames, as if someone had fed it fresh wood. "Did you?" "No." Sarah's voice was tight. "I checked all the vents, made sure everything was out. You saw me do it." I walked over to the fire ring. The wood looked fresh, arranged in a perfect teepee formation. But our leftover logs were still stacked exactly where we'd left them beside the picnic table. I looked around the campground. The elderly couple's trailer showed no signs of life, and there were no other campers close enough to have done this as some kind of prank. "Maybe the wind blew some embers around," I said. But even as I spoke, I remembered how still the air had been. Sarah stared at the flames with an expression I'd never seen before. A kind of fascinated dread. "Fire doesn't just light itself, Michael." I doused the flames with water from our fresh tank, and we ate breakfast in relative silence. Sarah kept glancing toward the trees, and I found myself doing the same. In daylight, the forest looked different than it had the night before. The spaces between the trees seemed deeper, more shadowed, even with the sun filtering through the canopy. "Let's do that hike," I said finally. "Get some fresh air. See those moose you were talking about?" Sarah nodded, but she moved mechanically as she packed our day pack. Water bottles, trail mix, bear spray, first aid kit. Always prepared, that was Sarah. I grabbed my phone to check the trail map one more time, but there was no signal. Not even emergency bars. GPS is down too, I said, frowning at the device. The maps showed the trail pretty clearly. We'll be fine. We locked up the RV and started hiking around 10 a.m. The Moose Lake Trail began as a well-marked path through mixed forest, wide enough for us to walk side by side. Sarah's mood improved as we walked, and she pointed out wildflowers and identified bird calls with the enthusiasm that had made me fall in love with her in the first place. "Red-winged blackbird," she said, tilting her head toward a trill echoing from somewhere ahead. "And that's a loon. How do you know all this stuff?" She smiled. "My dad used to take me camping when I was little. Before the divorce." The smile faded slightly. Sarah rarely talked about her childhood. Her father had left when she was 12, and she'd spent her teenage years taking care of her depressed mother. I think that's why she needed so much control over details. Too much of her early life had been chaos. About 2 miles in, the trail split. Our map showed only one path to Moose Lake, but here were 2 distinct routes, one continuing straight, the other branching left toward what looked like denser forest. "That's weird," Sarah said, pulling out the paper map. "This doesn't show a fork." The left path looked newer somehow, less worn. No markers, no trail blazes, but it was clearly a path. Someone had deliberately cleared it through the underbrush. "Let's stick to the main trail," I said. Sarah nodded, but as we continued straight, I caught her looking back toward the unmarked path several times. The main trail began to climb steadily, winding through stands of aspen and birch whose leaves whispered overhead despite the lack of any wind I could feel. That's when we heard the first voice. "Help." We both stopped walking. The word had come from somewhere ahead, off to the right of the trail. A man's voice, distant but clear. "Hello?" I called out. Silence. "Should we check it out?" Sarah asked. We listened for another minute but heard nothing more. I was about to suggest we continue when the voice came again, from the same direction but somehow farther away. "Help me. Someone's in trouble," Sarah said, already stepping off the trail toward the voice. I followed her through the trees, pushing aside low-hanging branches and stepping over fallen logs. The forest floor was spongy with decades of accumulated leaves, and our footsteps made no sound. After about 50 yards, we came to a small clearing. It was empty. "Hello?" Sarah called. "Are you okay?" The silence stretched out, broken only by the whisper of leaves overhead. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. Something about the clearing felt wrong. The trees around its perimeter were all the same species, white pine, and they formed an almost perfect circle. In the center, the grass grew in a different pattern, darker and lusher than the surrounding ground. "This is creepy," I muttered. Sarah was studying the tree line. The voice definitely came from here. Maybe they moved on. People's voices can carry weird distances in the woods. But as we turned to head back to the trail, we heard it again. This time, the voice was behind us. "Help me." We spun around. The clearing was still empty, but now the voice sounded familiar. It took me a moment to realize why. It sounded like my voice. Sarah heard it too. I could see it in her face, the way her eyes widened, then narrowed as she tried to process what we'd heard. "That was—" she started. "Let's go back to the trail." My real voice sounded strange to my own ears now. We found the main path again, but it took longer than it should have. The forest seemed to have shifted around us, and we emerged onto the trail about 100 yards past where we'd left it. Neither of us mentioned that impossibility. The rest of the hike to Moose Lake passed without incident, but the magic of the morning was gone. We ate lunch on a rocky outcrop overlooking the water, a pristine wilderness lake surrounded by dense forest. Beautiful and completely empty. No moose, no other hikers, no sounds except the gentle lap of water against the shore. "It's too quiet," Sarah said, echoing her words from the night before. She was right. Even for wilderness, the silence felt unnatural. No bird calls, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush, no buzz of insects. Just the lake and the watching trees and the growing weight of something wrong. We started back around 3 p.m., wanting to reach the RV before dark. The return hike should have taken 2 hours, but as the afternoon wore on, I began to recognize landmarks we'd already passed. The same fallen tree across a creek. The same distinctive boulder. The same lightning-struck pine with its blackened, split trunk. "Are we going in circles?" Sarah asked after we passed the split pine for what I was certain was the third time. I checked my phone's compass, but the needle spun wildly, never settling on any direction. GPS is still dead. The trail only goes one way. How can we be lost? But we were lost. As the sun sank lower through the trees, we found ourselves back at the trail junction where the unmarked path branched left. The same fork that shouldn't have existed according to our map. "This is impossible," Sarah said. "We've been walking for hours." I looked at my watch. 6:47 p.m. We'd been hiking for over 8 hours, but it felt like we'd only been walking for 3. Time seemed elastic out here. Unreliable. Maybe we should try the other path, I suggested. Sarah studied the unmarked trail. In the fading light, it looked even more inviting than it had that morning. Wider, clearer, as if it had grown more defined during the day. The map doesn't show it. The map doesn't show a lot of things, apparently. Sarah chewed her lower lip, a nervous habit I'd learned to recognize. "Okay, but if this doesn't lead back to the campground in an hour, we turn around." The unmarked trail descended gradually through increasingly dense forest. The trees here were older, massive pines and cedars that blocked most of the remaining daylight. Our footsteps were completely silent on a carpet of pine needles, and the air smelled of resin and something else. Something organic and slightly sour that I couldn't identify. After 20 minutes, we came to another clearing. This one was larger than the first, and in its center stood a structure that shouldn't have existed. A ranger station. It was a simple log building with a green metal roof and a wooden sign that read, "Boundary Waters Information Center." But there was no road leading to it, no power lines, no indication of how it had gotten there, and, more importantly, it wasn't on any of our maps. "How is this possible?" Sarah whispered. The building looked official, too well maintained to be some abandoned structure, but wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. The proportions seemed off, as if it had been built by someone who had seen ranger stations before but didn't quite understand how they worked. "Should we check it out?" I asked. Sarah was already walking toward the building. "Maybe there's a ranger inside. Maybe they can tell us how to get back." The front door was painted forest green and had a small window at eye level. Sarah knocked. "Hello? Is anyone there?" No answer. She tried the handle, and the door swung open with a soft creak. Inside, the ranger station looked exactly like it should. Wooden desk, filing cabinets, maps on the walls, informational brochures in wall-mounted holders. Everything was clean and organized, as if someone had just stepped out for a moment. Except for the smell. The same organic, sour odor from the forest was stronger in here. Not quite decay, but something related to it. Something wrong. "Look at this," Sarah said. She was standing in front of a large map mounted on the far wall. It showed the Boundary Waters area in detail, but the geography was wrong. Lakes where there should be forests, trails that curved in impossible directions, and in the center of the map, a large area marked only with the words "Do Not Enter" in red letters. "This place isn't real," I said quietly. Sarah traced her finger along one of the impossible trails on the map. "But we're here. We're standing in it." A sound made us both turn toward the desk. One of the drawers had somehow slid open while we weren't looking. Inside, we could see a logbook with handwritten entries. Sarah approached the desk cautiously and picked up the logbook. The entries were dated going back several months, all in the same handwriting. June 15th, lost hikers returned to trail. June 23rd, campers reported strange voices, guided to safety. July 2nd, solo hiker disappeared into restricted area. July 8th, couple, husband became aggressive after nightfall. July 15th, family of 4, youngest child would not stop smiling. The entries continued, becoming stranger and more disturbing. August 1st, hiker found items not his own in backpack. August 7th, claimed companion was not really him. August 12th. Campers reported fire that would not extinguish. August 18th. Man speaking in voices had to be restrained. Sarah turned the page and found today's date, September 3rd. Below it, in the same handwriting, was a single line. Michael Williams and Sarah Rodriguez. She will not be the same when she returns. Sarah dropped the book like it had burned her. It hit the floor with a loud thud that seemed to echo through the building much longer than it should have. "We need to leave," I said. "Right now." But Sarah was staring at something else. On the desk where the logbook had been sitting was a small handheld radio. Its red LED was blinking, indicating an incoming transmission. Without thinking, she picked it up and pressed the talk button. "Hello? Is someone there?" Static filled the room, then cleared to reveal a voice. Sarah's voice. "Michael? Michael, where are you? I'm lost. I can't find the trail." Sarah looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, but she was standing right beside me. The voice continued. "It's getting dark. There's something in the trees. Something watching me. Michael, please, I need help." Sarah pressed the button again. "I'm right here. I'm with Michael. Who is this?" The response came immediately in the same voice. "I don't know who you are, but you're not Sarah. Sarah would never leave me alone out here." I grabbed the radio from Sarah's hands and turned it off. In the sudden silence, we could hear something else. Footsteps on the wooden porch outside. Slow, deliberate footsteps, as if someone was pacing back and forth in front of the door. I moved to the window and peered out. In the growing darkness, I could just make out a figure walking across the porch. It looked like Sarah. The same height, the same dark hair, the same hiking clothes, but something was wrong with the way it moved. Too fluid, like it was floating just above the wooden boards. "Sarah," I whispered. "Look." She joined me at the window. When she saw the figure outside, she grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "That's not me," she whispered. The thing that looked like Sarah had stopped pacing and was now standing directly in front of the door. Even through the glass, I could see that it was smiling. A wide, unnatural smile that seemed to stretch too far across its face. It raised its hand and knocked on the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. "Hello?" it called out in Sarah's voice. "Is anyone in there? I'm lost. I need help." Sarah pressed herself against the back wall of the ranger station. "We can't let it in. It looks exactly like you. It's not me." Her voice was rising toward panic. "I'm me. That thing, whatever it is." The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "Please," the thing outside pleaded. "I'm scared. It's getting dark and there's something wrong with this place. Something following me." I had to admit, it sounded completely convincing. If I hadn't been standing next to the real Sarah, I would have opened the door immediately. "Michael," the fake Sarah called. "I know you're in there. I can smell you." That last word, smell, was said differently, with a hunger that made my skin crawl. We waited in the dark for what felt like hours. Eventually, the footsteps moved away from the door and faded into the forest. I checked my watch. 9:23 p.m. Somehow it had become full night while we were inside the ranger station. "We can't stay here," I said. "We can't go out there either. Not with that thing. We have to try to get back to the RV." Sarah nodded reluctantly. "Stay close to me. And if we get separated, we won't get separated." But even as I said it, I felt the weight of this place. Its wrongness. The way it bent rules and made impossible things seem normal. I wasn't sure we could trust anything here, including our ability to stay together. We left the ranger station through a back door that opened onto the forest. The unmarked trail continued beyond the building, winding deeper into the woods. Without our phones' flashlights, the batteries had mysteriously drained to zero. We had to rely on starlight filtering through the canopy. The forest at night was a completely different place. The silence we'd noticed during the day was broken now by sounds that shouldn't exist. Whispers just below the threshold of understanding. The crack of branches when there was no wind. And underneath it all, a low humming that seemed to come from the earth itself. "Do you hear that?" Sarah asked. "The humming?" "No. Listen." I stopped walking and focused. There, just barely audible, was the sound of someone singing. A woman's voice, wordless and haunting, coming from somewhere ahead on the trail. "That's beautiful," Sarah said, but something about her tone worried me. When I looked at her, her eyes were unfocused, dreamy. She started walking toward the sound. "Sarah, wait." She didn't respond. Her pace was increasing, and she was moving with that same fluid motion I'd seen in the thing outside the ranger station. "Sarah." I caught up to her and grabbed her arm. She turned to look at me, and for a moment, I didn't recognize her face. Her expression was blank, empty, and her eyes reflected starlight like an animal's. Then she blinked, and she was herself again. "What happened?" she asked, confused. "You were walking toward the singing." "What singing?" The voice had stopped. In fact, all the sounds had stopped. We were back to that unnatural silence, standing alone on a trail that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. "We need to get out of here," I said. But when we tried to continue, we discovered that the trail had changed. Where it had been leading gradually downhill, it now climbed steeply upward. Where it had been wide enough for two people, it was now narrow and overgrown. "This isn't the same path," Sarah said. "It has to be." We only stopped for a minute, but I knew she was right. This place was changing around us, shifting like a living thing, and we were trapped inside it. We climbed for what felt like hours. My legs ached and my lungs burned from the exertion, but the trail kept rising. According to the topographical maps we'd studied, there were no significant elevations in this area. The boundary waters were lake country, relatively flat. But here we were, climbing what felt like a mountain that shouldn't exist. Finally, the trail leveled out and emerged onto a rocky outcrop. Below us, impossible distances away, we could see lights scattered through the forest. Campfires and cabin windows, a whole community hidden in the wilderness where no community should be. "People," Sarah breathed. "Maybe they can help us." But as I stared at the lights below, I noticed something wrong. They weren't flickering like real flames. They pulsed in unison, like a heartbeat made of light. "I don't think those are people," I said. Sarah wasn't listening. She was staring at something else, a structure on the far side of the outcrop. It looked like our RV, parked in a small clearing with our familiar camping setup around it. "How is that possible?" I asked. Sarah was already walking toward it. "I don't care. I just want to get inside, lock the doors, and wait for morning." I followed her, but something felt wrong about the RV. It looked exactly right. The same model, the same color, even the same dent in the rear bumper from where I'd backed into a post at our last campground. But the windows were dark, and there was no sound from the generator we'd left running. Sarah reached the door first and tried the handle. It was unlocked. "The lights aren't working," she said, stepping inside. I followed her into the dark interior. Even without power, there should have been some ambient light from the windows, but inside, the RV was completely black. I fumbled for the manual light switch near the door. The lights came on, revealing our RV exactly as we'd left it, except for one thing. There was someone sleeping in our bed. It was Sarah. The same Sarah who was standing beside me, but somehow also lying unconscious in the bed above the cab. This second Sarah looked peaceful, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her chest rising and falling with deep, even breaths. "That's impossible," the Sarah beside me whispered. I stared at the sleeping figure. She was wearing the same clothes as the Sarah next to me, down to the small tear in her hiking shirt where it had caught on a branch earlier in the day. "Which one are you?" I asked quietly. Sarah, the one standing beside me, turned to look at me with an expression of hurt and confusion. "Michael, it's me. You know it's me." But did I? How could I be sure? The thing outside the ranger station had looked exactly like her too. The sleeping Sarah stirred and opened her eyes. When she saw us standing there, she sat up with a start. "Michael, how are you? Who is that?" She was looking at the Sarah beside me with the same confusion and fear I was feeling. "I'm Sarah," said the one next to me. "No," said the one in the bed. "I'm Sarah. Michael, we got lost on the trail, remember? We found that weird ranger station, and then something chased us through the woods. I've been waiting for you to come back. I stepped away from both of them. This was impossible. They were identical in every detail, every mannerism. They even had the same small scar on their left hand from a childhood accident with a broken glass. "One of you isn't real," I said. "Michael," said the Sarah who had been standing beside me. "You've been with me all day. You know which one I am." "Michael," said the Sarah from the bed, "don't listen to it. That thing has been pretending to be me. I've been trapped here, waiting for you to find me." I backed toward the RV's door. Both Sarahs stepped toward me, their movements perfectly synchronized. "Choose," they said in unison. The lights went out. In the darkness, I heard movement, but I couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. I fumbled for the door handle, found it, and stumbled outside into the night. Behind me, I could hear voices arguing. Both of them Sarah's voice, both saying the same words. "He knows I'm real. He knows I'm real. The other one is lying. The other one is lying." I ran into the forest, crashing through underbrush, not caring about the noise I was making. I had to get away from both of them, had to find something real in this place where nothing made sense. I ran until my lungs gave out, then collapsed against a large pine tree. When I caught my breath and looked around, I realized I was back at the original trail junction where we'd first seen the unmarked path. But now, in the darkness, I could see a third option. A narrow gap between two massive boulders that led deeper into the forest. Carved into one of the boulders, I could just make out words in the starlight. "Don't listen to her." The warning from the ranger station logbook. As I read it, I heard footsteps approaching through the forest. Someone was coming, walking with a slow, measured pace. "Michael," Sarah's voice called out. "Where are you? I'm scared." I pressed myself against the boulder and tried to stay silent. The footsteps were getting closer. "I know you're here," the voice continued. "I can smell your fear," the same word the thing outside the ranger station had used. Smell. Like I was prey. Through the trees, I could see a figure approaching. It looked like Sarah, but something was wrong with its proportions. Too tall, too thin, moving with that same fluid motion that defied gravity. "Found you," it said. But it was looking in the wrong direction, toward a cluster of trees about 20 feet away from where I was hiding. I realized it couldn't actually see me. It was hunting by scent or sound or some other sense I didn't understand. Very slowly, I began moving toward the gap between the boulders. The thing that looked like Sarah continued searching the trees, and for a moment I thought I might escape. Then I stepped on a branch. The crack echoed through the forest like a gunshot. The Sarah thing turned toward me and I could see its face clearly for the first time. It was Sarah's face, but wrong. The features were too sharp, the eyes too bright, and that smile stretched impossibly wide. "There you are," it said. I dove through the gap between the boulders just as it lunged toward me. The space was narrow, barely wide enough for my shoulders, but I squeezed through and found myself in a tunnel that led down into the earth. Behind me, I could hear the thing trying to follow, but it was too large now. Its true form, whatever that was, couldn't fit through the gap. It made sounds of frustration that were definitely not human. The tunnel was carved from solid rock and seemed to continue indefinitely downward. I had no choice but to follow it, feeling my way through complete darkness. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and covered with symbols that I could feel but not see. After what felt like hours of descending, I saw light ahead. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber lit by torches mounted on the walls. In the center of the chamber was a pool of black water, perfectly still and reflecting the torchlight like a mirror. And sitting beside the pool was Sarah, the real Sarah. I knew it was her immediately. Not because of how she looked, all the versions had looked identical, but because of the way she reacted when she saw me. The relief and love and fear in her eyes were emotions that couldn't be faked. "Michael," she whispered. "Thank God. I thought I'd lost you." I ran to her and pulled her into my arms. She felt real, solid, warm, human. "How long have you been down here?" I asked. "I don't know. Hours? Days? Time doesn't work right in this place." She was shaking. "I followed that singing, remember? You tried to stop me, but I couldn't help myself. The voice was so beautiful. It led me here. What is this place? I think it's some kind of center, the heart of whatever's wrong with this forest. She gestured toward the pool. Look. I approached the black water cautiously. As I got closer, images began to form on its surface. I could see the ranger station, but now it was falling apart, its logs rotting and its roof caved in. I could see our RV, but it was rusted and covered with decades of moss and decay. It shows the truth, Sarah said. Everything up there is an illusion, a trap. But we rented the RV yesterday. We drove here yesterday. Did we? Sarah's voice was very quiet. Look again. I stared into the pool and the images shifted. I saw myself and Sarah hiking the trail, but we looked different. Younger. Our clothes were different too. Styles from years ago. How long have we been here? I asked. I don't think we ever left. The truth hit me like ice water. The strange occurrences, the impossible geography, the way time seemed elastic. We'd been trapped here from the beginning, maybe for years. The things upstairs, Sarah continued, they're echoes, shadows of people who got lost here. They keep playing out the same events over and over, trying to find a way out that doesn't exist. But you're real. You're here with me. Am I? She smiled sadly. How do you know I'm not just another echo? Before I could answer, we heard sounds from the tunnel above. Footsteps, multiple sets descending toward us. The echoes had found another way in. We have to go, Sarah said. Go where? There's nowhere left to run. She pointed to the far side of the chamber where I now noticed another tunnel leading away into darkness. There. I think it leads out. Really out. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear voices now. Multiple versions of our own voices calling to each other, coordinating their search. Sarah and I ran toward the far tunnel just as the first echo emerged into the chamber. It looked like me, but its eyes were completely black, and when it saw us, it let out a sound that was part scream, part laughter. More echoes poured into the chamber behind it. Versions of us. Versions of other people who must have gotten lost in this place over the years. All of them moving with that same fluid, inhuman grace. The tunnel we'd entered was rougher than the first one, carved hastily through rock and dirt, but I could feel air moving through it. Real air, not the stagnant atmosphere of the chamber. Behind us, the echoes were following, but they seemed reluctant to enter this tunnel. As we climbed upward, their voices faded until we could no longer hear them. The tunnel ended at a metal grate that opened onto a storm drain. Beyond it, I could see streetlights and pavement. The real world. We crawled through the grate and found ourselves in a suburban neighborhood that looked nothing like the wilderness where we'd started our hike. A street sign read, Pine Valley Drive, Duluth, MN. Duluth is 100 miles from where we were camping, I said. Sarah checked her phone, which was somehow working again. Look at the date. September 15th, 2028. 12 days after we'd entered the boundary waters. But according to my memories, we'd only been hiking for one day. We walked to the nearest house and knocked on the door. An elderly woman answered, and when we explained that we were lost hikers, she looked at us strangely. Lost hikers? She said. Son, there haven't been any hikers reported missing in the area for weeks. She let us use her phone to call for help. When the police arrived, they ran our names through their system and found something disturbing. We'd been reported missing 6 months ago. Our families had been looking for us. Our jobs had given up on us returning. But to us, it felt like we'd only been gone for a day. The official explanation was that we'd suffered some kind of shared psychotic episode, possibly caused by dehydration or exposure. The doctors said it wasn't uncommon for people to lose track of time when lost in the wilderness, and that the brain sometimes creates elaborate fantasies to cope with trauma. They never found our RV. The rental company said they had no record of us ever renting one. The campground we thought we'd stayed at didn't exist on any maps. Sarah and I tried to return to our normal lives, but everything felt wrong. Colors seemed faded. Food had no taste. People looked like shadows of themselves, echoes of something more real. And at night we both dreamed of the same thing, That underground chamber, that pool of black water, and the terrible knowledge that we might still be down there. That the suburban house we think we live in now might just be another illusion, another trap designed to keep us from finding the real way out. Sometimes, when Sarah thinks I'm not looking, I catch her staring at me with a strange expression, as if she's trying to figure out whether I'm really me or just another echo. And sometimes, late at night when she's sleeping, I stare at her and wonder the same thing. The worst part is the smiling. It starts small, just a slight upturn at the corners of her mouth when she thinks no one is watching, but it's getting wider each day, stretching further across her face than any human smile should go, just like the thing that pretended to be her in those woods. I never believed in the stories they told about Boundary Waters, but now I know the truth. Some places don't let you leave. They keep you, and they send back something that looks like you but isn't quite right. And if you're reading this, if you're planning a trip to the Boundary Waters or any other wilderness area, remember this. If someone you love goes missing and comes back, check their smile. Check it very carefully, because they might not be smiling at you. They might be smiling at the thought of what they're going to do to you when the lights go out. They warned us. Locals always do. But we laughed. My name's Michael Williams. I had just turned 32 when we arrived at Ocala National Forest, and it was the worst mistake of our lives. Sarah and I had been together for 3 years, and this RV trip was supposed to be our escape from the suffocating routine of city life. She'd found this remote campground online, Juniper Creek Recreation Area, buried deep in the heart of Florida's Ocala National Forest. The photos showed pristine wilderness, crystal-clear springs, and towering sand pines creating a natural cathedral, perfect for a romantic week away from everything. No cell service, Sarah had said with a grin as we loaded our rental RV. Just you, me, and nature. I should have paid more attention to the way the rental guy's face changed when I mentioned Juniper Creek. Should have asked why he suddenly wanted to double-check our emergency equipment. Should have wondered why he threw in extra batteries and a satellite radio, just in case. But Sarah's excitement was infectious. At 29, she still had that wild streak that had drawn me to her. The way she'd grab my hand and pull me toward any adventure. Her dark eyes sparkling with mischief. She was a nurse at Jacksonville General, used to handling emergencies, and her confidence made me feel bulletproof. The drive from Jacksonville took us deeper into Florida's interior than I'd ever been. Pine forests stretched endlessly on both sides of increasingly narrow roads. The GPS started acting up about an hour before we reached our destination, the screen flickering between route calculations and blank static. Technology, Sarah laughed, consulting the paper map spread across her lap. This is why they still make these things. The last gas station we'd seen was 40 miles back, a lonely outpost where the attendant had looked at us strangely when we mentioned Juniper Creek. "Y'all be careful out there," he'd said, his weathered face serious. "Swamp gets funny this time of year." "Funny how?" I'd asked, but he'd just shaken his head and turned away. Now, as we bounced along the unpaved forest road, Spanish moss hanging like funeral shrouds from ancient oaks, I was beginning to understand what he meant. The forest felt alive. Not in the pleasant Disney nature documentary way, but in something far more primitive. Watchful. There. Sarah pointed ahead to a weathered wooden sign barely visible through the undergrowth. Juniper Creek Recreation Area, sites 15 to 20. We were the only ones there. The campground was smaller than the photos had suggested. Just 6 RV pads carved out of the swamp connected by a narrow gravel road that disappeared into black water on 3 sides. Our site, number 18, sat at the very end, surrounded by towering cypresses whose roots disappeared into dark, still water that reflected nothing. "It's perfect," Sarah said as I maneuvered the 30-foot RV into position. "Look at this place. We have our own private lagoon." She was right. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way. The water was so dark it looked like black glass, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the gentle splash of what might have been a manatee or alligator. The air was thick with the smell of rich earth and decomposing vegetation. Not unpleasant, just old, ancient. We spent the rest of the afternoon setting up camp. Sarah strung solar lights around our outdoor table while I figured out the RV's electrical hookups. The campground had power and water, though both seemed inconsistent. The water pressure fluctuated randomly, and the electricity hummed with an odd frequency that made the LED lights flicker. Probably just old infrastructure, I told myself, but something about the place felt deliberately isolated, as if it had been forgotten on purpose. As evening approached, the forest came alive with sounds. Not the cheerful chirping of birds I'd expected, but deeper things. The splash of something large moving through water, the crack of branches under weight I couldn't identify, and underneath it all, a sound I couldn't quite place. Almost like whispering. "Do you hear that?" I asked Sarah as we sat outside with our dinner. She tilted her head, listening. "Hear what?" "That talking, like voices." She was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "It's just the wind through the trees, baby, and maybe some night birds." But I knew wind, and I knew birds. This was different. It rose and fell like conversation, multiple voices overlapping in a language I couldn't understand but that somehow felt familiar, like a half-remembered dream. Sarah seemed unaffected. She was reading by lamplight, completely absorbed in her novel, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand. Every now and then she'd look up at the dark water and smile, as if she saw something there that pleased her. "What are you looking at?" I asked finally. "Just the water. It's so peaceful, like a mirror." I followed her gaze but saw only impenetrable blackness. No reflections, no movement. The water was still as death. That first night, I woke to the sound of our RV door opening. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. I lay still, listening to the gentle hydraulic hiss of the door mechanism, followed by footsteps on the metal stairs. Sarah's side of the bed was empty, the sheets still warm. I slipped out of bed and peered through the window. She was standing at the edge of the water, maybe 20 feet from our RV, wearing only her white nightgown. The fabric seemed to glow in the moonlight as she stood perfectly still, her back to me. "Sarah?" I called softly, not wanting to startle her if she was sleepwalking. She didn't respond, didn't even move. I pulled on shorts and a t-shirt and stepped outside. The night air was thick and humid, filled with the sounds of the swamp, bullfrogs, insects, and that persistent whispering that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Sarah, what are you doing?" She turned slowly, and in the moonlight her face looked different. Peaceful, but in a way that seemed wrong. Her eyes were open but unfocused, and she was smiling. Not her usual warm smile, but something broader, more vacant. "The water is singing," she said softly. "What? Can't you hear it? It's so beautiful." I listened but heard only the normal sounds of the swamp. "Honey, you're dreaming. Come back to bed." She blinked several times, and suddenly she was herself again. Confused, embarrassed, cold. "Oh, God, Michael, I'm sorry. I don't know. I must have been sleepwalking. I haven't done that since I was a kid." I wrapped my arm around her and led her back to the RV. "It's okay. New place, different sounds. Your brain's probably just processing everything." But as we climbed the steps, I glanced back at the water. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw ripples spreading out from where she'd been standing, as if something had just sunk beneath the surface. The next morning, Sarah seemed perfectly normal. She made coffee and eggs while humming cheerfully, planning our day of hiking and exploring, but there were small things that bothered me. She kept glancing toward the water, and twice I caught her just staring at it with that same vacant smile from the night before. "You feeling okay?" I asked as we prepared to leave for a hike. "Better than okay," she said, kissing my cheek. "I slept so well. The most amazing dreams." "What about?" Her smile faltered for just a moment. I can't really remember, but they were beautiful." We decided to explore one of the hiking trails marked on the campground map, a 3-mile loop that supposedly led to a natural spring. The trailhead was marked by another weathered sign, this one barely legible. Juniper Springs Trail. Use caution. No lifeguard on duty. The path started well-defined, winding through pine flatwoods and hammock forests. But as we went deeper, it became increasingly overgrown and difficult to follow. The canopy grew thicker, blocking out more and more sunlight until we were walking in perpetual twilight. "This doesn't feel like the right trail," I said after we'd been walking for over an hour without seeing any sign of a spring. Sarah consulted the map. According to this, we should have reached the spring 20 minutes ago. The trail had branched several times, and we'd chosen our direction based on what seemed like the most used path. But now, looking around, I realized we hadn't seen any trail markers in quite a while. "Let's head back," I suggested. "We can ask at the ranger station." But when we turned around, there was no clear path behind us. The forest stretched in all directions, thick and seemingly impenetrable. Every direction looked the same: towering pines, palmetto undergrowth, and that strange filtered light. "That's impossible," Sarah said, spinning in a slow circle. "We were just following the trail." I checked my phone. No signal, of course, but the GPS should still work. The screen showed our location as a blank green space with no roads, no trails, no landmarks. According to the phone, we were standing in the middle of an unmapped wilderness. "Don't panic," I said, more to myself than to Sarah. "We'll pick a direction and walk straight. We can't be more than a couple miles from the campground." But even as I said it, I realized I had no idea which direction that might be. The sun was hidden behind the thick canopy, and every direction looked identical. We walked for what felt like hours. The forest seemed to shift around us, familiar landmarks appearing and disappearing. Twice we came across fallen logs that I could have sworn we'd passed before, but from different angles. Sarah grew increasingly quiet, and I noticed she kept glancing over her shoulder as if something was following us. "Do you hear that?" she asked suddenly. I stopped and listened. Beyond the normal forest sounds, there was something else. A low humming, almost like singing. It seemed to come from ahead of us, back the way we'd come, and from both sides simultaneously. "We need to keep moving," I said. The humming grew louder as we walked, and now I could make out what sounded like multiple voices harmonizing in that same language I couldn't identify. Sarah had stopped responding to my attempts at conversation and was walking with that same vacant smile I'd seen the night before. Then, impossibly, we emerged into a clearing where our RV sat exactly as we'd left it. "That can't be right," I said, checking my watch. We'd been walking for over 3 hours, and yet here we were, apparently having walked in a perfect circle. Sarah didn't seem surprised. She walked straight to the RV without a word, leaving me standing at the forest's edge, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That evening, I tried to retrace our route on the map, but nothing made sense. According to the campground layout, there was no way we could have gotten lost on such a short trail. The entire recreation area was only a few hundred acres, surrounded by roads. "Maybe we took a wrong turn early on," Sarah suggested, but she didn't sound concerned. If anything, she seemed almost amused by my confusion. As darkness fell, she became increasingly restless. She kept walking to the window and staring out at the water, humming softly under her breath. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, but I couldn't identify it, and when I asked her about it, she claimed she wasn't humming at all. "You must be hearing things," she said with that strange smile. At dinner, she barely touched her food, pushing it around her plate while gazing out at the black water. When I tried to engage her in conversation about our plans for the next day, she responded with vague nods and murmurs. "Sarah, what's wrong with you?" She looked at me with genuine surprise. "Nothing's wrong. I feel wonderful, more peaceful than I have in years." But she didn't look peaceful. She looked distant, as if part of her was somewhere else entirely. That night, I made sure to stay awake. I lay in bed pretending to sleep while watching Sarah through half-closed eyes. For hours, she lay perfectly still, breathing slowly and deeply. Then, just after 3 a.m., she sat up. She moved with careful, deliberate motions, slipping out of bed and padding barefoot to the RV door. I waited until I heard it open, then followed. This time, she didn't stop at the water's edge. She walked directly into the black lagoon, her white nightgown billowing around her as the water rose to her knees, then her waist. "Sarah!" I shouted, running after her. She turned, and in the moonlight I saw her face clearly. Her eyes were completely black, not just the pupils but the entire visible portion, as if they'd been filled with the same dark water she was standing in. Her smile was wider than any human smile should be, stretching impossibly from ear to ear. "The water is so warm," she said in a voice that sounded like multiple people speaking in unison. "Come join me, Michael. Come see what I've seen." I plunged into the water after her. It was shockingly cold, not warm as she'd claimed, and it felt thick, almost viscous. As I reached for her, she slipped away from me like smoke, moving deeper into the lagoon with impossible grace. "Sarah, please, something's wrong. We need to get you out of here." She laughed, and the sound echoed off the water in ways that made no sense, as if it was coming from beneath the surface as well as above it. "Nothing's wrong," she said, her voice shifting between her familiar tone and something else entirely. "Everything is exactly as it should be, as it's always been." I lunged forward and managed to grab her arm. Her skin was ice cold and felt strange, almost slippery. When I pulled her toward shore, she offered no resistance, but she never stopped smiling that horrible, too wide smile. Back in the RV, I wrapped her in blankets and turned the heat up as high as it would go. She was shivering violently, her lips blue with cold, but she kept insisting she felt wonderful. "We're leaving," I said. "First thing in the morning. Something about this place is making you sick." "No," she said quietly. "We can't leave. Not yet." "What do you mean we can't leave?" She looked at me with those black eyes, and for a moment her expression was perfectly lucid and utterly terrified. "Because I don't think I'm me anymore." Then the moment passed, and she was smiling again, humming that haunting melody while staring out at the water. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in a chair facing the door, determined not to let her leave the RV again. But as dawn approached, exhaustion finally overtook me, and I dozed off. I woke to find her gone. The RV door was standing open, early morning mist drifting in from the swamp. I ran outside, calling her name, but there was no sign of her anywhere. The campground was utterly silent except for that persistent whispering that now seemed to be coming from the water itself. I spent the entire day searching. I walked every trail I could find, called her name until my voice was hoarse, and even waded into the deeper parts of the lagoon, terrified of what I might find. But there was nothing. No footprints, no torn clothing, no sign that she'd ever existed. By evening, I was preparing to drive to the nearest town for help when I heard her voice. "Michael, where are you?" She emerged from the forest just as the sun was setting, still wearing her nightgown, though it was now dry and clean. She looked confused and disoriented like someone waking from a deep sleep. "Sarah, where have you been? I've been looking for you all day." "All day?" She blinked, looking around in genuine bewilderment. "I just went for a walk after breakfast. I couldn't have been gone more than an hour." I showed her my watch. It was nearly 7 p.m. "That's impossible," she said, but she was looking at her own watch now and her face was pale with confusion. "Sarah, we're leaving. Right now. Something is seriously wrong here." She nodded slowly, still staring at her watch. "Yes, okay. I think something strange is happening to me." I threw our belongings into bags while she sat on the RV steps, holding her head in her hands. When I went to start the engine, she was still sitting there, but she was smiling again. "Ready?" I asked. "Oh yes," she said, and her voice had that strange harmonic quality again. "I'm very ready." The RV started fine, but as I tried to back out of our campsite, the wheels spun uselessly in what should have been solid gravel. I got out to look and found that our RV was somehow mired in thick black mud that hadn't been there an hour before. "That's odd," Sarah said, but she didn't sound concerned. She sounded amused. I tried rocking the RV back and forth, gunning the engine, even putting boards under the tires. Nothing worked. The mud seemed to pull the vehicle deeper with every attempt to move. "We'll have to walk out," I said, "get to the main road and call for help." But when we reached what should have been the access road, we found only more forest. The gravel road we'd driven in on was gone, replaced by thick undergrowth that looked like it had been growing undisturbed for decades. "This is impossible," I said, turning in circles. "The road was right here." "Was it?" Sarah asked, and when I looked at her, her eyes were black again. That's when I realized the truth. We weren't leaving because we weren't meant to leave. Whatever had taken Sarah was keeping us here, and it was using her to do it. The next few days blurred together in a nightmare of false hope and crushing despair. Sometimes Sarah would seem normal, crying and begging me to help her, claiming she could feel something else living inside her mind. Other times she would speak in that harmonic voice about the beauty of the water and how peaceful it was to let go. During her lucid moments, she told me things that made my blood freeze. "It's been here so long," she whispered one morning as we sat in the RV. "Older than the swamp, older than the trees. It was here when the first people came, and it took them too. Made them forget they had ever wanted to leave. What does it want? To not be alone. It's been alone for so long, Michael. Centuries. Maybe thousands of years. It just wants someone to stay with it. Then we'll find a way to leave." No, she said, and now her voice was changing again, becoming that chorus of whispers. "We won't. Because part of me doesn't want to leave anymore. Part of me wants to sink into that beautiful dark water and never come up." I tried everything I could think of. I attempted to signal for help using the RV's emergency radio, but got only static. I tried to hike out in different directions, but every path led me back to the campground. I even tried to build a raft to cross the lagoon, thinking maybe we could escape by water, but the logs I cut wouldn't float. They sank like stones the moment they touched the dark surface. And Sarah was getting worse. During the day, she would seem almost normal, but every night at 3:17 a.m. exactly, she would walk into the water. By the fourth night, she was staying under longer and longer, and when she emerged, more of her humanity had been stripped away. "You should join me," she said on the fifth night, water streaming from her hair as she stood knee-deep in the lagoon. "It doesn't hurt, Michael. It's like coming home. You're not Sarah anymore." I'm more Sarah than I've ever been. I understand things now. About the water, about this place, about why people come here and never want to leave. People have left. People leave all the time. She laughed, and the sound rippled across the water like stones skipping on the surface. "Do they? When was the last time you saw another camper? Another car on the road? When was the last time you heard a plane overhead?" I tried to think, but she was right. Since we'd arrived, the world outside the campground had seemed to simply not exist. No sounds of civilization, no other people, nothing but the endless forest and that whispering water. "How long have we been here, Michael?" I looked at my watch, but the digital display was blank. My phone was dead, even though I'd charged it that morning. Or had I? Time seemed to flow differently here, hours passing like minutes, days blending into one endless twilight. "I don't know," I admitted. "Neither do I. And it doesn't matter. Time doesn't mean anything here. Nothing means anything except the water and the voices and the peace." That night, I didn't try to stop her when she walked into the lagoon. Instead, I watched from the RV window as she waded deeper and deeper until only her head was visible above the black surface. Then she went under, and I counted the minutes. 5 minutes, 10, 15. No one can hold their breath for 15 minutes. When she finally surfaced, she walked back to the RV as if nothing had happened. But the woman who entered our mobile home wasn't Sarah anymore. She looked like Sarah, spoke with Sarah's voice, but behind her eyes was something vast and ancient and utterly alien. "Your turn," she said simply. "No. It's time, Michael. You can't fight it forever. Look around you. Look at what this place has become." I did look, and what I saw made me understand that we'd passed beyond any hope of rescue long ago. The RV was no longer sitting on a gravel pad, but on what looked like the bottom of a lake bed. Black water surrounded us on all sides, lapping at the windows, and I could see things moving in the depths, pale shapes that might once have been human. "How long?" I whispered. "Does it matter? You're with me. We're together. Isn't that what you wanted?" She reached for me with hands that felt like water made solid, and I let her pull me toward the door, because part of me, the part that loved her more than my own life, wanted to follow her anywhere, even into that dark water where the whispers promised peace and forgetting. But as we reached the threshold, some last spark of self-preservation made me pull back. "This isn't real," I said. "This is all some kind of hallucination. We're probably dying of dehydration or hypothermia or—" The thing wearing Sarah's face turned toward me, and its expression was no longer even remotely human. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing not teeth but more darkness, more water, more whispers. "Real," it said in a voice like drowning, "is what you make it." I ran. I burst out of the RV and plunged into the forest, branches tearing at my clothes and skin as I pushed through the undergrowth. Behind me, I could hear that harmonic voice calling my name. Sometimes Sarah's familiar tone, sometimes something else entirely. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. When I finally collapsed, I found myself in a small clearing where moonlight filtered down through the canopy. And there, impossibly, was a road. Not the gravel access road we'd driven in on, but a real paved highway with yellow lines and reflective markers. In the distance, I could see headlights approaching. I staggered onto the asphalt, waving my arms frantically. The car, a state police cruiser, pulled over, and a concerned officer got out. "Sir, are you all right? You look like you've been through hell." I tried to explain about the campground, about Sarah, about the thing in the water, but the words came out in a jumbled rush that must have sounded like the ravings of a madman. "Slow down," the officer said. "Let's start with your name and what you're doing out here." "Michael Williams. My girlfriend and I were camping at Juniper Creek Recreation Area, but something happened to her. Something's in the water there. It took her, changed her. We need to send a rescue team." The officer was looking at me strangely. "Sir, there's no campground called Juniper Creek in Ocala National Forest. Never has been." "That's impossible. We drove here. We had reservations." He was already reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I've got a disoriented male on Highway 40. Appears to be suffering from exposure and possible mental distress. Request medical assistance." "No, you don't understand. We need to go back for Sarah. She's still there, in the water." "Sir, I need you to calm down. We're going to get you some help." The paramedics arrived within minutes, checking my vitals and asking questions I couldn't answer coherently. They said I was dehydrated and hypothermic, suffering from what appeared to be several days of exposure. But that was impossible. We'd only been at the campground for 5 days. Or was it 6? Or longer? At the hospital, they ran tests and kept me for observation. A detective came to interview me about Sarah's disappearance, but when they investigated, they found no record of our reservations, no RV rental agreement, no evidence that we'd ever been to any campground in the area. "Your girlfriend, Sarah Rodriguez," the detective said, consulting his notes. "How long have you been together?" 3 years. He frowned. "Mr. Williams, we've been unable to locate any records of a Sarah Rodriguez matching the description you provided. No employment at Jacksonville General Hospital, no driver's license, no Social Security records. Are you sure about her name?" I tried to describe her, but as the words left my mouth, I realized I was struggling to remember exactly what she looked like. Her face was becoming hazy in my memory, like trying to recall a dream. "She was real," I insisted. "We lived together. We were planning to get engaged." But even as I said it, I couldn't remember our apartment, couldn't recall specific conversations or shared experiences. It was as if she was fading from my memory in real time. They kept me in the psychiatric ward for observation, convinced I was suffering from some form of delusional episode brought on by exposure and isolation. Maybe they were right. Maybe I'd gone into the forest alone and created an entire fantasy about a girlfriend who never existed. But if that was true, why did I wake up every night at 3:17 a.m., listening for the sound of a door opening? Why did I find myself humming a melody I couldn't identify? Something hauntingly beautiful that seemed to come from deep water. And why, when I looked in the mirror, did my reflection sometimes smile just a little too wide? They released me after 2 weeks with a prescription for antipsychotics and a referral to a therapist. I returned to Jacksonville and tried to rebuild my life. though I could never shake the feeling that something fundamental was missing. I searched online for any mention of Juniper Creek Recreation Area and found nothing. No reviews, no photos, no government records. It was as if the place had never existed. But sometimes, late at night, I would find myself driving east on Highway 40, pulled by an urge I couldn't explain. I would drive until I reached the Ocala National Forest, then cruise slowly along the back roads, looking for a gravel turnoff that led to a campground that might or might not be real. I never found it. But on my third such trip, 6 months after my rescue, I noticed something odd. At a gas station near the forest, the same one where we'd stopped on our way to the campground, the attendant looked at me strangely. "You were here before," he said as I paid for gas. "I don't think so." "Yeah, you were, with a girl. Pretty little thing with dark hair. Told you to be careful out there." He paused, studying my face. "You look different now, though. Thinner, sadder. When was this?" He shrugged. "Could have been last week, could have been last year. Time gets funny around here." As I drove home that night, I caught myself humming again. That same haunting melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep in my memory. And in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw her sitting in the back seat, water dripping from her hair, smiling that too wide smile. But when I turned around, there was nothing there. Just the sound of something wet hitting the floor. I don't drive east anymore. I've moved inland, as far from any large body of water as I can get. But distance doesn't matter. Every night at 3:17 a.m., I wake to the sound of whispers that might be wind or might be voices calling my name from somewhere dark and deep. Sometimes I catch myself walking toward the bathroom, toward the sound of running water, before I realize what I'm doing and force myself to stop. Because I know that if I ever answer those whispers, if I ever step into dark water again, I'll finally understand what happened to Sarah. I'll see her again, and she'll be exactly as beautiful as I remember, floating in that peaceful place where time doesn't matter and no one ever has to leave. The water is singing, Michael. Can't you hear it? It's so beautiful, so warm, so welcoming. All I have to do is let go. Just let go. Let go, let go, let go, let go. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from Hocking Hills. I'm Sarah Rodriguez, and I was 28 when I learned that some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. Michael and I had been together for 3 years when we decided to take that camping trip to southeastern Ohio. We'd been talking about getting engaged, about taking the next step, and he thought a romantic weekend in the wilderness would be perfect for big conversations. The October air was crisp, the leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold, and Hocking Hills State Park seemed like the ideal backdrop for planning our future together. I should have known something was wrong when our GPS started acting up 20 miles from the park entrance. The screen kept flickering between our route and a blank blue void, the electronic voice cutting in and out with garbled directions that made no sense. Michael laughed it off, his warm brown eyes crinkling at the corners the way they always did when he was trying to keep me from worrying. "Just technology being technology, babe," he said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "We've got the paper maps as backup, but when we pulled those maps out of the glove compartment, they looked wrong, faded in places they shouldn't be, with roads that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I traced our route with my finger, and the paper felt strangely warm, almost organic. "Did you buy these maps recently?" I asked, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. Michael frowned, studying the yellowed edges. "I thought so. Maybe they're just old stock?" We eventually found our way to the campground as the sun began its descent behind the canopy of ancient oaks and maples. The Hocking Hills region was known for its sandstone cliffs, deep gorges, and extensive cave systems carved out over millennia. Our campsite was tucked into a secluded spot near Ash Cave, far enough from other campers that we could barely hear their voices echoing off the canyon walls. The first night passed peacefully enough. We built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and talked about wedding venues and baby names under a canopy of stars that seemed unusually bright. Michael was in his element outdoors. He'd grown up camping with his father, and there was something about watching him tend the fire that made me fall in love with him all over again. His dark hair caught the firelight as he poked at the logs, and when he looked up at me, his smile was pure contentment. "This is perfect," he said, pulling me closer on the log we were sharing. "Just you, me, and all this beautiful nature." I nestled into his side, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and his familiar cologne. "It really is. I can see why you love it out here." But as the fire died down and we prepared for bed, I noticed something odd. Our sleeping bags, which we'd left zipped together in the tent, were now separate. Not just unzipped, completely apart as if someone had carefully moved them to opposite sides of the small space. "Did you do something with the sleeping bags?" I asked as Michael emerged from brushing his teeth at the camp sink. He looked genuinely puzzled. "No, why?" I showed him, and he scratched his head. "Weird. Maybe the wind, somehow." But there hadn't been any wind that evening. The air had been perfectly still. We pushed the sleeping bags back together and tried to laugh it off, but I found myself lying awake long after Michael's breathing had settled into the steady rhythm of sleep. Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. The rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and something else I couldn't quite identify. A low humming that seemed to come from deep underground, vibrating through the earth beneath our tent. The second day started with another unsettling discovery. Michael had gone to get water from the pump near the restrooms, and when he returned, his face was pale. "Sarah," he said slowly, "come look at this." He led me to a tree about 50 yards from our campsite. Carved into the bark, about eye level, were symbols I'd never seen before. Not letters or numbers, but intricate geometric patterns that seemed to twist and shift when I stared at them too long. Below the symbols, in fresher carving that looked like it had been done recently, were 2 words: "Don't listen." "Those weren't there yesterday," I said, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Michael ran his fingers over the fresh cuts in the bark. Someone must have done this during the night. But who? And why here, so close to our site? We spent the morning hiking the rim trail around Ash Cave, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over us. The cave itself was magnificent. A massive recess in the sandstone cliff, 90 feet high and 100 feet deep, with a waterfall cascading down from the rim above. But something about the echoes unsettled me. When other hikers called out to test the acoustics, their voices seemed to hang in the air longer than they should, and sometimes I swore I heard additional voices calling back from deeper within the cave. "Did you hear that?" I asked Michael as we stood near the back wall of the recess. "Hear what?" A child's laughter, high and sweet, echoing from somewhere in the rock behind us. But when I turned to look, there was nothing but solid sandstone. Michael suggested we explore some of the smaller caves in the area that afternoon. He'd brought his headlamp and a good flashlight, and he was eager to show off his spelunking knowledge. I wasn't as enthusiastic about crawling through dark spaces, but I didn't want to spoil his excitement. We found a narrow opening in the cliff face about a quarter-mile from the main cave. According to Michael's research, it connected to a larger cave system that wound deep into the hills. The entrance was just wide enough for one person at a time, and as I squeezed through after him, the walls seemed to press in around me. "You okay back there?" Michael's voice echoed strangely in the confined space. "Fine," I lied, fighting the urge to turn around and scramble back to daylight. The cave opened up after about 20 feet into a chamber large enough for us to stand upright. Michael's headlamp beam swept across limestone formations and flowstone deposits that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. But there was something wrong with the air in there. It felt thick, almost syrupy, and carried a smell like wet earth and old copper. "Look at this," Michael said, his light focusing on the far wall. I followed the beam and gasped. Covering the wall were more of those strange symbols we'd seen carved into the tree. But these were different, older, etched deep into the stone. Some were filled with what looked like rust or dried blood, and they seemed to form patterns that hurt to look at directly. "We should go," I said, my voice sounding thin and strange in the enclosed space, but Michael was fascinated. He moved closer to the wall, reaching out to trace one of the symbols with his finger. The moment he made contact, something changed. The air grew colder and I heard it again, that humming from underground, but much louder now, as if we'd gotten closer to its source. "Michael, please, let's get out of here." He turned to look at me, and for just a moment, his face looked different in the harsh LED light. Older somehow, and his eyes. His eyes reflected the light like an animal's. But then he blinked, and he was just Michael again, looking concerned. "Of course, babe, you're right. This place gives me the creeps too." We made our way back through the narrow entrance, and I'd never been so grateful to feel sunlight on my face. But as we walked back toward our campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed down there in the dark. Michael seemed normal enough, chatting about the geological formations we'd seen, but there was something off about his voice. A slight echo, as if he was speaking from the bottom of a well. That evening, as we sat around our rebuilt campfire, I noticed other changes. Michael kept staring into the flames with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, and when I spoke to him, there was always a slight delay before he responded, as if he was translating my words in his head. "Are you feeling okay?" I asked, scooting closer to him on our shared log. He turned to me with that same slight delay, and when he smiled, I noticed his teeth seemed different, sharper somehow. "Never better," he said, but his voice had that hollow quality again. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the strange atmosphere of the place was getting to me. But when I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, Michael wasn't in his sleeping bag. I called his name softly, not wanting to wake other campers, but got no response. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside the tent. The campsite was empty, our fire reduced to glowing embers. In the distance, I could hear something moving through the underbrush. Footsteps, but with an odd rhythm, as if the walker was dragging one foot. "Michael," I called, louder this time. The footsteps stopped. Then, from the direction of the cave we'd explored earlier, I heard his voice. "Sarah, Sarah, help me. I'm lost." But something about the voice was wrong. It sounded like Michael, but the words were too precise, too carefully pronounced, like someone imitating speech patterns they'd observed but didn't quite understand. I stood there in my pajamas and bare feet, torn between running toward the voice and running away from it. The smart part of my brain was screaming that something was very wrong, but my heart was telling me that Michael needed help. "Where are you?" I called back. "In the cave. I'm hurt. Please come." The voice was definitely coming from the direction of the cave entrance, but it still didn't sound quite right. I made a compromise. I went back into the tent and got dressed, put on my hiking boots, and grabbed the bigger flashlight and my phone. If Michael was hurt in the cave, I'd need proper equipment to help him. The walk to the cave in the dark was terrifying. Every shadow seemed to move, and the sound of my own footsteps was unnaturally loud. When I reached the entrance, I called out again. "Michael, I'm here. Where exactly are you?" "Deeper in," came the response echoing from the bowels of the cave system. "Follow my voice." I hesitated at the entrance. Everything in my body was telling me not to go in there. But what if he really was hurt? What if he'd gotten lost in the cave system and couldn't find his way out? I squeezed through the entrance and into the first chamber, my flashlight beam dancing across the walls covered in those disturbing symbols. The air felt even thicker than before, and that metallic smell was stronger. "Michael!" "Keep coming. I'm just ahead." I moved deeper into the cave, following a passage I hadn't noticed during our earlier visit. The walls narrowed again, forcing me to crouch, and my claustrophobia kicked in full force. My breathing became shallow and rapid, and I had to fight the urge to turn around and run. The passage opened into another chamber, larger than the first, and my flashlight beam revealed something that made my blood freeze. Scattered across the floor were belongings. Backpacks, water bottles, pieces of clothing, all in various states of decay. Some looked recent, others seemed to have been there for years. "Sarah!" The voice was right behind me. I spun around and there was Michael, standing in the passage entrance. But something was horribly wrong with him. His skin was pale, almost gray in the flashlight beam, and his eyes reflected the light with an unnatural shine. When he smiled, I could see that his teeth had indeed changed. They were pointed now, predatory. "You came," he said, and his voice had that echoing quality, as if it was coming from multiple sources at once. "Michael, what happened to you? Are you hurt?" He took a step closer and I noticed he wasn't breathing. His chest wasn't moving at all. "I'm perfect now," he said. "I understand everything. The symbols, the voices, what this place really is." I backed away from him, my light sweeping across the scattered belongings on the cave floor. "What is this place?" "It's home," he said, taking another step forward. "It's been calling to us for so long, and now we can finally answer. We." His smile widened, and I realized with horror that it wasn't just his teeth that had changed. His face was shifting, features rearranging themselves in subtle but deeply wrong ways. "You and me, Sarah. Together forever, just like we always planned." I turned and ran. The passage seemed longer than before, the walls pressing in around me as I scrambled toward what I hoped was the exit. Behind me, I could hear him following, but his footsteps had that same dragging quality I'd heard earlier. Whatever was wearing Michael's face wasn't quite used to walking upright. I burst out of the cave entrance and ran blindly through the woods, branches tearing at my clothes and face. I could hear him behind me, calling my name in that perfect imitation of Michael's voice, but with that hollow echo that gave it away. "Sarah, wait! You don't understand." I ran until I reached our campsite, then threw our belongings into bags with shaking hands. I had to get out of there, had to get away from whatever had taken Michael's place. But as I was shoving sleeping bags into the trunk of our car, I heard footsteps approaching. Sarah. The voice was gentler now, more like the Michael I knew. "Baby, what are you doing? Why are you packing?" I turned slowly, and there he was, looking completely normal in the pale pre-dawn light. No gray skin, no pointed teeth, no reflecting eyes. Just Michael, looking confused and concerned. "You were in the cave," I said carefully. "You were different." He frowned, running a hand through his dark hair. "Cave?" "Sarah, I went for a walk because I couldn't sleep. I've been sitting by the lake for the past hour, thinking about our future. I came back to get you so we could watch the sunrise together." I stared at him, searching for any sign of the thing I'd encountered in the cave. But his eyes were warm and human. His smile was the one I'd fallen in love with, and when he breathed, his chest rose and fell normally. "I'm worried about you," he said, stepping closer. "You've been acting strange since we got here. Maybe we should head home early." Was I losing my mind? Had the stress of our relationship, the talk of engagement, caused me to have some kind of breakdown? The Michael standing in front of me seemed completely normal, completely real. Maybe you're right," I said, my hands still trembling. "I haven't been sleeping well." He pulled me into his arms and he felt warm and solid and familiar. "It's okay. We'll pack up and drive home today. We can try camping again some other time." But as he held me, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. He smelled different. Instead of his usual cologne and the outdoorsy scent I'd grown to love, there was something else underneath. That metallic, coppery smell from the cave. We packed up the campsite in daylight, and Michael seemed perfectly normal throughout the process. He made jokes, helped me fold the tent properly, and even stopped to take a selfie of us in front of the beautiful fall foliage. When I looked at the photo later, we both looked completely normal, though I thought I could see something strange in the background. A dark figure standing at the edge of the tree line. The drive home was uneventful. Michael chatted about work, about the football game he wanted to watch that weekend, about normal, everyday things. I started to convince myself that I'd had some kind of panic attack in the cave, that my imagination had run wild in the dark. But over the following weeks, I noticed small changes. Michael's eating habits shifted. He'd always been a hearty eater, but now he barely touched his food, just pushed it around his plate while watching me eat with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. When I asked about it, he'd smile and say he was trying to lose weight, but when I wasn't looking, I sometimes caught him staring at raw meat in the grocery store with an expression I'd never seen before. Hunger, but not for food. His sleep patterns changed too. I'd wake in the middle of the night to find his side of the bed empty, and when I'd go looking for him, I'd find him standing at the window, perfectly still, staring out at the darkness. When I asked what he was doing, he'd say he was just thinking, but his voice had that same hollow quality I'd heard in the cave. The worst part was his eyes. In the right light, at certain angles, they'd reflect like an animal's. I started taking pictures of him when he wasn't paying attention, trying to capture proof, but in every photo, his eyes looked normal. 3 weeks after our camping trip, I came home from work to find him in the kitchen, hunched over something on the counter. When I called his name, he spun around with that slight delay, his hands behind his back. "Hey, babe," he said, but his smile seemed forced. "How was your day?" "Fine. What are you working on?" "Nothing important." But I could smell something metallic in the air, and when I looked at the counter behind him, I saw dark stains that looked suspiciously like blood. That night I pretended to be asleep and watched him through barely open eyes. Around 3 a.m. he got up and walked to the window, moving with that strange, dragging gait I'd heard in the woods. He stood there for nearly an hour, perfectly motionless before returning to bed. I started researching the Hocking Hills area online, looking for any mention of strange occurrences or local legends. What I found made my blood run cold. There were stories going back decades about campers who'd gone missing in the area, and others who'd returned from camping trips changed, according to their families. Some had simply disappeared after a few weeks. Others had been found dead in circumstances that suggested they'd been killed by something with claws and teeth. The most disturbing story was from 1987. A young couple had gone camping in the same area where Michael and I had stayed. The woman had returned alone, claiming her boyfriend had died in a cave-in. But the body was never found, and 6 months later, she was found dead in her apartment, apparently mauled by some kind of animal. The neighbors reported that in the weeks before her death, she'd complained about her deceased boyfriend visiting her at night, tapping on her windows and calling her name. I knew I had to get away from whatever was wearing Michael's face. I started making plans to leave town, to disappear and start over somewhere else. But, as if sensing my intentions, the thing became more attentive, more affectionate. It would bring me flowers, cook my favorite meals, though I noticed it never actually ate them, and tell me how much it loved me in Michael's voice. "I've been thinking about our conversation before the camping trip," it said one evening as we sat on the couch watching TV. "About getting married." My heart pounded, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "Oh?" It reached into its pocket and pulled out a ring box. When it opened the box, the ring inside was beautiful. A vintage setting with a brilliant diamond that caught the light perfectly. But the band looked old, tarnished, as if it had been buried for a long time. "Sarah Rodriguez," it said, getting down on one knee with that same careful precision that marked all its movements. "Will you marry me?" I stared at the ring, at the thing wearing Michael's face, and knew I had to play along until I could figure out how to escape. "Yes," I whispered, and it slipped the ring onto my finger with hands that felt cold despite the warmth of the room. That night, I locked myself in the bathroom and examined the ring under bright light. Engraved on the inside of the band, in tiny script, was a name. Margaret Thompson, 1987. The woman from the newspaper article. The one who'd been found dead after her boyfriend went missing in the caves. I understood then that this thing, whatever it was, had been doing this for decades, luring people into the caves, taking their place and slowly draining the life from their loved ones before moving on to the next victim. I had to get out before it was too late. The next morning, I told it I was going to visit my sister in Chicago to show her the ring and plan the wedding. It seemed pleased by this, smiling with Michael's face while those two bright eyes watched me with predatory intensity. "How long will you be gone?" it asked. "Just a few days." "I'll miss you terribly," it said, pulling me close. Its skin felt cold now, and when it breathed, I could smell that metallic scent on its breath. I packed a single bag and drove straight to the police station. But how do you tell law enforcement that your boyfriend has been replaced by something inhuman? They'd think I was having a psychotic break. Instead, I drove to my real sister's house 3 states away and told her I was leaving Michael, that our relationship had become dangerous. She didn't ask too many questions, just helped me find a temporary apartment and a new job under my maiden name. For 6 months, I thought I was safe. I changed my phone number, deleted all my social media accounts, and tried to build a new life. But then the phone calls started. Always at 3 a.m., always from a blocked number, and always Michael's voice with that hollow echo saying my name over and over. Sarah, Sarah, Sarah. I moved again, this time across the country to Oregon, but the calls followed me. And sometimes, late at night, I'd see a familiar figure standing under the streetlight outside my apartment, perfectly still, watching my windows. Last week, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a wedding invitation, beautifully printed on expensive paper. The honor of your presence is requested at the marriage of Michael Williams and Sarah Rodriguez. Ash Cave, Hocking Hills State Park. October 31st, 3Q. M. Traditional attire not required. Some celebrations require sacrifice. At the bottom, written in what looked like dried blood, was a single line. The bride is expected to attend. I'm writing this story now because I know it's found me again. I can feel it getting closer. That presence I've been running from for over a year. Last night, I woke up to find my apartment door standing open, though I'd locked it and put on the chain. On my kitchen table was a single black rose and another ring. This one engraved with a different name, from a different decade. I don't know how many people it's done this to over the years, how many lives it's stolen and worn like masks. But I know it's not going to stop until it has me back. The worst part is that sometimes, in my dreams, I can still hear the real Michael calling for help from somewhere deep in those caves. Sometimes I wonder if he's still down there, trapped in the dark with all the others, watching helplessly as something else wears his face and hunts the people he loved. I think about going back. I think about finding those caves and trying to save him, trying to destroy whatever ancient thing has been feeding on love and life for decades. But I know that's exactly what it wants, for me to come back willingly, to complete whatever ritual it started that October night. So instead, I'm running again. Tomorrow, I'll disappear to a new city, with a new name, and hope that distance will keep me safe for a while longer. But I know the truth now. Some things don't let go, some hungers are never satisfied. And somewhere in the darkness beneath Hocking Hills, something that looks like the man I loved is still wearing his face, still calling my name in that perfect imitation of his voice. And one day, when I'm tired of running, when I can't fight anymore, I know I'll answer. The ring is still on my finger. I've tried to take it off 1,000 times, but it won't budge, as if it's become part of me. Sometimes, when the light hits it just right, I can see other names etched in the band. A catalog of all the women who've worn it before me, all the lives that thing has consumed. I am Sarah Rodriguez. I am 29 years old, and I am the next name on a list that goes back generations. The only question now is how long I can keep running before it's time to go home. We should have never gone to Hocking Hills. I'm David Jones. I was 26 back then. And this is the story of how I lost everything. It was October 2023. And the four of us had been planning this camping trip for months. Sarah Rodriguez, my girlfriend of 3 years, had found this secluded spot deep in the Ohio wilderness through some obscure hiking forum. Michael Williams, my college roommate, was going through a messy divorce and needed to get away from civilization. Ashley Robinson, Sarah's best friend since childhood, had just finished her residency and wanted one last adventure before starting her surgical career. We should have stayed home. The drive to Hocking Hills took us through increasingly remote back roads, past hand-painted signs warning about private property and narrow bridges that creaked under the weight of Michael's Jeep. The GPS started acting up about 20 miles from our destination, the screen flickering between satellite and road view, sometimes showing us in the middle of a lake that didn't exist. Technology, Michael muttered, tapping the screen. Give me a paper map any day. But we didn't have a paper map. None of us thought we'd need one. The ranger at the visitor center was an older man with deep lines carved into his face like the gorges that split the landscape. When Sarah mentioned our campsite coordinates, his expression darkened. "That's pretty far back in there," he said slowly. "You folks experienced." "We've done plenty of camping, Ashley said with that confident smile that had gotten us out of trouble more times than I could count. "We're not rookies." The ranger studied her for a long moment. "It's not about experience, miss. It's about respect. Those hills have been there longer than any of us, and they don't take kindly to visitors who don't know their place." Sarah laughed, the sound bright and dismissive. "We're just camping, not disturbing ancient burial grounds." The ranger didn't laugh back. Instead, he reached under the counter and pulled out a small worn piece of paper. "Local emergency numbers," he said, handing it to me. "Cell service is spotty back there. Real spotty. And if you hear voices calling to you from the caves—" He paused, his eyes meeting each of ours in turn. "Don't follow them, no matter how familiar they sound." The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Ashley broke it with another laugh, but this one sounded forced. "Thanks for the warning," I said, pocketing the paper. "We'll be careful." As we walked back to the Jeep, Ashley shook her head. "Locals and their ghost stories. You'd think we were planning to sacrifice a virgin under the full moon." But I noticed Michael had gone quiet, and Sarah was chewing her bottom lip the way she did when something bothered her. The drive to our campsite took another hour down increasingly rough roads. The trees pressed closer on both sides, their branches sometimes scraping against the Jeep's roof with sounds like fingernails on metal. The GPS had given up entirely, showing only a blue dot floating in gray digital void. When we finally reached the coordinates Sarah had found, I understood why the spot had been available. The campsite was little more than a small clearing beside a creek that ran black as oil in the fading afternoon light. Ancient trees surrounded us, their trunks so thick it would take all four of us holding hands to circle one. The air smelled of decomposition and something else, something sweet and cloying that made my stomach turn. "It's perfect," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. We set up camp as the sun began to set, the temperature dropping faster than it should have in October. The silence was oppressive. No birds, no insects, just the sound of that dark creek gurgling past our tents like it was choking on something. Ashley was the first to notice the cave. "Look at that," she said, pointing beyond the tree line. About 50 yards from our camp, a jagged opening gaped in a limestone cliff face. It was just tall enough for a person to walk through upright, and it breathed out air that was noticeably colder than the surrounding forest. "We should explore it tomorrow," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "I don't think that's a good idea," Sarah said quietly. "Remember what the ranger said about the caves?" Ashley waved dismissively. "He was talking about getting lost, not ghost stories. I've done plenty of spelunking. It's probably just a small chamber, but even from a distance I could tell it wasn't small." The darkness beyond the entrance seemed to swallow the beam of Ashley's flashlight without giving anything back. That first night, none of us slept well. The temperature dropped to near freezing, unusual for October, and our sleeping bags weren't rated for it. But it wasn't just the cold that kept me awake. It was the sounds. Around midnight, I heard voices. They were faint at first, like people having a conversation just far enough away that you couldn't make out the words. I unzipped my tent partially and listened, thinking maybe other campers had arrived. But as I focused, the voices seemed to be coming from the direction of the cave. One of them sounded familiar. I was about to wake Sarah when the voices stopped abruptly, cut off mid-sentence like someone had turned off a radio. The silence that followed was so complete it made my ears ring. In the morning, I mentioned the voices to the others. Ashley looked intrigued, Sarah worried, and Michael just grunted and started making coffee on our portable stove. "Probably just echo effects," Ashley said. "Sound can travel really far in cave systems. We might have been hearing people miles away." "At midnight?" Sarah asked. "Why not? Some people prefer night hiking." But I had noticed something she hadn't. When I checked our supplies that morning, Ashley's sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside, and her boots were muddy. After breakfast, Ashley was insistent about exploring the cave. "We drove all this way," she said. "We can't just sit around camp all day. Besides, I brought proper gear." She had brought gear, headlamps, rope, even a small first aid kit. Against my better judgment, I found myself agreeing. Sarah was reluctant, but she didn't want to be left alone at camp. The mouth of the cave was larger up close, easily 10 feet wide and 8 feet tall. The limestone walls were smooth, worn by water over countless years. Ashley tested the air with a lighter. The flame burned steady, indicating good ventilation. "See?" she said. "Perfectly safe." We roped together with Ashley in the lead, me second, Sarah third, and Michael bringing up the rear. Our headlamps carved narrow cones of light through the darkness, but they seemed inadequate against the vast black that surrounded us. The cave entrance led to a chamber about the size of a small room, with passages branching off in 3 directions. The walls were covered in flowstone formations that looked like melted wax, and water dripped steadily from somewhere we couldn't see. "Which way?" Michael asked, his voice echoing strangely. Ashley consulted a small compass. "Left passage slopes down. Might lead to a larger chamber." "How can you tell?" Sarah asked. "Air current. Feel it." I did feel it. A subtle breeze coming from the left passage that smelled of deep earth and something else. Something organic and unpleasant. We took the left passage. The tunnel was narrow enough that we had to walk single file, the walls close enough to touch on both sides. I fought down a surge of claustrophobia as the ceiling gradually lowered, forcing us to duck. "Ashley," I called ahead, "maybe we should turn back. This is getting pretty tight." "Just a little further," her voice echoed back. I can see it opening up ahead, but something in her voice sounded off. There was an eagerness that seemed out of proportion to cave exploration, and when I looked ahead, her headlamp seemed dimmer somehow, as if the light itself was being absorbed by whatever lay beyond. The passage did open up, into a chamber so large our lights couldn't find the far walls. Our footsteps echoed for what seemed like minutes, suggesting a space of cathedral proportions. Stalactites hung from the invisible ceiling like stone teeth, and the floor was uneven, covered in loose rocks that shifted treacherously underfoot. "Jesus," Michael whispered, "this place is huge." Ashley had moved ahead of us, playing her light across the walls. "Look at these formations," she called. "They're incredible." I followed her beam and froze. The walls weren't just covered in flowstone, they were covered in symbols. Carved deep into the limestone were shapes that hurt to look at directly, symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the moving light of our headlamps. "We need to leave," Sarah said immediately. "Now." But Ashley was mesmerized. She had moved close to one wall, running her fingers over the carved symbols. "These are old," she said, her voice strange and distant. "Really old. Pre-Columbian, maybe. Or older." "Ashley, come on," I said. "Sarah's right. We shouldn't be here." She turned toward us, and for a moment her face looked wrong in the headlamp light. Her features seemed stretched, her eyes too wide, her smile too broad. "Don't you want to see what's deeper?" she asked. "There's so much more to explore." "No," I said firmly. "We're leaving. Now." But when I reached for the rope that connected us, I found only empty air. Somehow, we had become separated. "Where's the rope?" Michael asked, playing his light across the chamber floor. We searched for 15 minutes but couldn't find it. It was as if the rope had simply vanished. "It doesn't matter," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "We'll just retrace our steps." But when we turned back toward where we had entered the chamber, there were 3 passages instead of 1. 3 identical openings in the limestone wall. "Which one?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with fear. Ashley shone her light down each passage in turn. "This one," she said, pointing to the middle passage. I remember, but I didn't remember. And looking at the passages, they all looked the same to me. We followed Ashley into the middle passage, but within minutes, I knew we were going the wrong way. The passage was sloping down instead of up, and the walls were closing in again. Worse, I could smell that organic odor getting stronger, like meat left too long in the sun. "Ashley, stop," I called. "This isn't right." But she was moving faster now, almost running. Her light bounced ahead of us, creating wild shadows on the tunnel walls. "Ashley," Sarah called. "Wait." We chased her through a maze of twisting passages, our lights swinging wildly as we tried to keep up. The tunnels seemed to multiply around us. branching and diverging in impossible ways. The sound of our breathing and footsteps was amplified and distorted until it sounded like we were being chased by something much larger than ourselves. And then Ashley's light disappeared. We caught up to where we had last seen her, but the passage simply ended in a blank wall of limestone. There was no other exit, no side passages, nothing. "Ashley!" I shouted, my voice echoing endlessly. "Ashley, where are you?" No answer. We searched for hours. We called until our voices were hoarse. We shone our lights into every crevice and examined every wall. But Ashley was gone, as if she had simply stepped through solid rock. Finally, exhausted and terrified, we admitted defeat. Sarah was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. Michael's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his flashlight. "We have to get out of here," I said. "We have to get help." Finding our way back to the main chamber took another hour of wrong turns and dead ends. When we finally emerged from the cave system, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across our campsite. We had been underground for nearly 8 hours. Michael immediately tried his cell phone, but there was no signal. The radio in the Jeep produced only static. We were completely cut off. "We'll drive out first thing in the morning," I said. "Get the rangers, organize a search party." But Sarah shook her head. "We can't leave her. What if she finds her way out and we're not here?" She was right, of course, so we agreed to take shifts watching the cave entrance through the night. If Ashley emerged, someone would see her. I took the first watch. I sat on a fallen log about 20 yards from the cave mouth, wrapped in a sleeping bag, playing the beam of my flashlight across the limestone entrance every few minutes. The forest around me was absolutely silent. Not even the sound of wind in the trees. Around midnight, I heard voices again. This time, they were clearer. 2 people having a conversation just inside the cave entrance. I couldn't make out the words, but one voice was definitely female. "Ashley," I called softly. The voices stopped. I waited, holding my breath, but they didn't resume. I was about to call louder when I saw movement at the cave mouth. A figure emerged from the darkness, a woman's silhouette. "Ashley!" I stood up, relief flooding through me. Thank God. "Are you okay?" The figure walked toward me, but something about her movement was wrong. She walked too smoothly, as if she were gliding rather than walking. And she was too quiet. No sound of footsteps on the rocky ground. As she got closer, I could see that it was Ashley. Same height, same build, same dark hair. But when she stepped into the beam of my flashlight, I nearly dropped it. Her smile was too wide. Her eyes reflected the light like an animal's, and her skin had a gray pallor that made her look like she had been underwater for hours. "Hello, David," she said, and her voice was Ashley's voice, but it was coming from somewhere else, somewhere deeper. "Did you miss me?" I stepped backward, my heart hammering. "Ashley, where have you been? We looked everywhere for you." "I've been exploring," she said, still smiling that impossible smile. "I found the most wonderful things down there, ancient things, beautiful things." She was close enough now that I could smell her, that same organic decay I had noticed in the deeper passages of the cave. "You should come with me," she said, reaching out with one pale hand. "I want to show you what I found." I need to wake the others," I said, backing away further. "They've been worried sick." Her head tilted to one side, and for a moment her face looked like it was shifting, like there was something else underneath trying to push through. "The others," she repeated, and her voice had taken on an odd echo, as if multiple people were speaking in unison. "Yes, bring the others. They should see too." I turned and ran back to camp. Sarah and Michael were awake before I reached their tents, roused by the sound of my crashing through the underbrush. "David, what is it?" Sarah called. "Ashley's back," I said, gasping for breath. "But something's wrong with her. Something's really wrong." They emerged from their tents, flashlights in hand. "Where is she?" Michael asked. I turned to point back toward the cave, but Ashley was standing right behind me. She had moved without making a sound, and now she was close enough that I could see the dirt under her fingernails and the small cuts on her face from the cave walls. "Hi, Sarah," she said, her voice warm and friendly, completely normal. "Hi, Michael. I'm sorry I worried you." Sarah rushed to embrace her, relief evident on her face. "Ashley, we were terrified. Where were you? How did you get out?" "I found another exit," Ashley said, returning the hug, but over Sarah's shoulder she was looking at me, and her eyes were still reflecting the light. "A wonderful exit. I can show you if you'd like." "We should get you checked out," Michael said. "You might have a concussion. You look pale." Ashley laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking. "I feel wonderful. Better than I've ever felt. The cave showed me so many things." She pulled away from Sarah and turned that too wide smile on all of us. "We should pack up and leave," I said quickly. "Get you to a hospital." "Oh, but we can't leave yet," Ashley said. "Not when there's so much more to see, so much more to explore." She gestured toward the cave entrance, and I swear I saw other figures moving in the darkness beyond. Figures that looked like Ashley but weren't quite right. "I'm not going back in there," I said. Ashley's smile faltered for just a moment, and something else looked out from behind her eyes. Something old and patient and hungry. "Of course not," she said, her voice sweet again. "We don't have to go tonight. We have plenty of time." But I noticed she positioned herself between us and the Jeep. The rest of the night passed in a haze of wrong details and mounting dread. Ashley sat by our dying campfire, talking about her adventure in the cave. But her story kept changing. First, she said she had fallen through a crack in the floor. Then she said she had found a hidden passage. Then she claimed she had never been lost at all, just exploring. And she wouldn't stop smiling. Worse, Sarah and Michael seemed to accept her explanations without question. When I tried to point out the inconsistencies, they looked at me like I was the one acting strangely. "You're being paranoid," Sarah said when I pulled her aside. "She's fine. A little shaken up, maybe. But fine." But Ashley wasn't fine. I watched her throughout the night and she never blinked. Not once. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, staring into the fire with those reflecting eyes. And sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, her smile would slip and I would catch a glimpse of something else underneath. Something that wasn't Ashley at all. As dawn approached, I made a decision. I was going to get the keys to the Jeep and drive out for help, with or without the others. But when I approached the vehicle, I found Ashley standing beside it. "Going somewhere?" she asked. "We need to get you to a doctor," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't think so," she said, and her voice had that strange echo again. "I think we should all stay here, together, forever." The keys weren't in the ignition where Michael had left them. They weren't anywhere in the Jeep. "Looking for these?" Ashley held up the keys, dangling them from one finger. "Give me those," I said. "I don't think so," she repeated. "Not until you see what I found. What's waiting for all of us?" That's when I noticed the others approaching. Sarah and Michael were walking toward us, but their movements were the same as Ashley's. Too smooth, too quiet. And they were smiling the same impossible smile. "David," Sarah said, her voice layered with echoes, "come with us. Come see what we've seen." I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and face with the sound of pursuit behind me. But it wasn't the sound of footsteps. It was something else. Something that slithered and whispered and called my name in voices I recognized. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, and when I finally stopped to listen, the forest was silent again. But I was lost. Completely, hopelessly lost. I wandered for 3 days. I found the creek several times, but it led me in circles, always back to clearings that looked familiar but weren't quite right. The trees seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them, and sometimes I would hear my friends calling to me from distances that kept changing. On the 3rd night, delirious from thirst and exhaustion, I found a road. A real road, with yellow lines and tire tracks. I followed it for hours until I saw headlights approaching. The driver was a local man who took one look at me and drove straight to the ranger station. The rangers organized a search party immediately, but when they reached the coordinates I gave them, they found nothing. No campsite, no cave, no trace that we had ever been there. The GPS coordinates led to a section of Hocking Hills that had been closed to the public for over a decade due to unstable cave systems and unexplained disappearances. They searched for 2 weeks. They brought in dogs, cave rescue specialists, even ground-penetrating radar. But they never found Sarah, Michael, or Ashley. They never found our campsite or the cave entrance I described. According to the official report, my 3 friends had never existed. There were no missing person reports filed for them. No one came forward to claim them. When I tried to show the investigators photos on my phone, the pictures were corrupted. Just gray static and shadows that might have been faces. I was diagnosed with severe dehydration and psychological trauma. The doctors suggested that I had suffered some kind of breakdown and invented the entire scenario. They prescribed medication and therapy and assured me that with time I would feel better. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to my friends. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear them calling to me. Their voices drift through my apartment windows. Carried on wind that smells of deep earth and decay, they want me to come back. They want me to see what they've seen, to join them in whatever they've become. I've changed apartments 6 times in the past year. I've moved to different cities, different states, but their voices always find me. Last week, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a set of car keys and a map of Hocking Hills. The cave entrance was marked with a red X, and there was a note in handwriting I recognized. David, we're waiting for you. We have so much to show you. Your friends. I threw the package away, but that night I dreamed of limestone passages and symbols that hurt to look at. I dreamed of figures that looked like my friends but weren't quite right, standing in the darkness beyond a cave entrance, smiling those impossible smiles. I woke up this morning to find mud on my boots and cave dust on my clothes. My apartment keys were missing, replaced by the car keys from the package. I think they're coming for me. I think they've been coming for me all along, following me through whatever web of passages connects their world to ours, and I think eventually I'm going to stop running, because despite everything, despite the fear and the horror and the knowledge of what they've become, I miss them. I miss Sarah's laugh and Michael's stories and Ashley's fearless enthusiasm for adventure. And sometimes, in the darkest part of the night, their voices almost sound normal again, almost sound like the friends I remember. They promise me that if I come back, if I follow them into the deep places beneath Hocking Hills, I'll understand everything. I'll see what they've seen. I'll become what they've become. And maybe that would be better than living with this knowledge alone. Maybe that would be better than remembering them as they were while knowing what they are now. The cave is calling to me. Through 1,000 miles of stone and soil and darkness, it's calling to me. And sooner or later, I know I'm going to answer, because we should never have gone to Hocking Hills. But now that we have, now that we've seen what waits in the deep places of the earth, there's no going back. There's only going deeper. They warned us. Locals always do. But we laughed. My name's Dylan Foster. I had just turned 29 when we arrived at Hocking Hills, and it was the worst mistake of our lives. The RV rental had seemed like such a good idea back in Columbus. Lily and I needed time away from everything. My recent unemployment, her 12-hour nursing shifts, the growing silences between us that felt heavier than words. 6 days in southeastern Ohio's most beautiful state park would fix things, we told ourselves. We'd hike the gorges, explore caves, remember why we fell in love. I should have known something was wrong when the rental agency clerk kept glancing at our destination on the paperwork. Hocking Hills, huh? He was maybe 60, with deep lines around his eyes and calloused hands. Y'all planning to stay in the main campground? We reserved a spot near Old Man's Cave, Lily said, leaning against the counter in her faded jeans and hiking boots. Even after 3 years of marriage, she still took my breath away. Auburn hair catching the afternoon light, freckles scattered across her nose like stars. The clerk's expression darkened. Might want to consider staying closer to the visitor center. Gets strange out there sometimes, especially this time of year. I laughed, the sound echoing harsh in the cramped office. Strange how? Folks get turned around. Lost. Sometimes they come back different. He handed me the keys, his fingers cold against mine. Just stick to the marked trails. And if you hear voices calling from the caves, don't answer. Lily and I exchanged glances. She rolled her eyes and grabbed my arm. Thanks for the tip, she said sweetly, already pulling me toward the door. The drive south took 2 hours through rolling farmland and increasingly dense forest. Our 30-foot Winnebago handled well enough, though I'd never driven anything that size before. Every curve made my knuckles white on the steering wheel. You're being paranoid, Lily said, reading my tension. She'd changed into a green flannel that brought out her eyes. It's just camping, Dylan. People do it every day. I know. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were driving into something we shouldn't. The trees grew thicker as we entered the park, their canopy so dense that afternoon felt like dusk. The GPS kept losing signal, forcing me to rely on increasingly faded road signs. When we finally reached our reserved spot at the Ash Cave campground, the sun was already setting behind the hills. The site was more isolated than I'd expected, tucked into a grove of ancient oaks with only one neighboring RV visible through the trees. The forest pressed close on all sides, a wall of shadow and rustling leaves. It's perfect, Lily breathed, stepping out to survey our surroundings. The silence was absolute except for the whisper of wind through branches. No traffic, no neighbors, no civilization beyond our little aluminum bubble. I forced a smile. Yeah, perfect. Setting up camp took longer than expected. The RV's electrical system was finicky, and I spent an hour troubleshooting the water pump while Lily organized our supplies. By the time we had everything functioning, full darkness had settled over the campground like a thick blanket. I'm exhausted, Lily said, collapsing onto the dinette bench. Let's just eat something simple and get some sleep. We can start exploring tomorrow. We heated canned soup on the stove and ate by the light of the overhead LED fixture. Outside, the darkness was complete. No streetlights, no glow from distant houses, just an endless black void beyond our windows. The forest had gone utterly silent. No insects, no rustling leaves, no night birds, just nothing. Listen to that quiet, Lily murmured. When's the last time we experienced real silence? I nodded, but something about the stillness felt wrong. Unnatural. Forests weren't supposed to be this quiet, even at night. There should have been owls hooting, branches creaking, small animals moving through the underbrush. Instead, it was as if everything living had simply stopped. We went to bed early, crawling into the small master bedroom at the RV's rear. Lily fell asleep immediately, her breathing deep and regular against my shoulder. I lay awake for hours, listening to that oppressive silence and watching shadows play across the ceiling whenever clouds drifted past the moon. Sometime after midnight, I heard the first voice. It was faint, barely audible through the RV's walls, a woman calling out from somewhere in the darkness. I couldn't make out words, just the rising and falling cadence of someone trying to get attention. Help, maybe. Or a name being called over and over. I slipped carefully out of bed, trying not to wake Lily, and padded to the small window above the dinette. Pressing my face to the glass, I peered out into the night. The voice came again, clearer now. Definitely a woman, definitely distressed. "Hello?" I called softly, not wanting to wake my wife, but needing to respond. "Are you okay out there?" The voice stopped abruptly. The silence returned, thick and heavy. I waited another 10 minutes before climbing back into bed, but sleep didn't come. Every time I started to drift off, I thought I heard that voice again. Sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, always just at the edge of comprehension. Morning brought relief and embarrassment in equal measure. Bright sunlight streamed through the RV's windows, and the forest came alive with birdsong and rustling leaves. The previous night's oppressive quiet seemed like a bad dream. "Sleep well?" Lily asked, already dressed in hiking shorts and a tank top. She was brewing coffee on the small stove, filling our cramped space with rich, familiar aromas. "Like a baby," I lied. No point worrying her over what was probably just my imagination running wild in an unfamiliar place. We spent the morning hiking the Grandma Gatewood Trail, a easy loop that wound through towering hemlocks and along Hocking Creek. Lily was in her element, pointing out wildflowers and interesting rock formations, her face bright with excitement. This was what I'd hoped for. My wife, happy, relaxed, the stress of recent months melting away with each step. The trail led us to Old Man's Cave, the park's most famous attraction. The massive rock shelter stretched nearly 200 feet across, its ceiling lost in shadow despite the bright morning sun. A waterfall cascaded down the back wall, filling the space with echoing droplets and mist. "It's incredible," Lily whispered, her voice small in the vast space. Other hikers moved through the cave like ghosts, their conversations muffled and distorted by the acoustics. I tried to share her wonder, but something about the place made my skin crawl. The ceiling pressed down despite being 40 feet overhead. The walls seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, and there was a smell. Not unpleasant exactly, but wrong somehow. Sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. "Can we go?" I asked after only a few minutes. "I'm getting claustrophobic." Lily shot me a concerned look but nodded. We emerged into blessed sunlight, and I took deep breaths of clean forest air. The feeling of oppression lifted immediately, but I couldn't shake the memory of that smell. We spent the rest of the day hiking easier trails, eating lunch by Cedar Falls, taking pictures of each other against scenic backdrops. Normal couple things. Happy things. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself that our Hocking Hills adventure would be exactly what we needed. We cooked dinner over the campfire. Hot dogs and beans, simple camp food that tasted amazing under the stars. The neighboring RV remained dark and quiet, its occupants apparently gone for the day. We might have been the only people for miles. "This was a good idea," Lily said, leaning against my shoulder as we watched the fire dance. "We should do this more often." "Yeah," I agreed, meaning it. "Sorry I was weird in the cave today. Tight spaces just get to me sometimes." "I know." She squeezed my hand. "We don't have to go in any more caves if you don't want to." But even as we sat there in comfortable companionship, I could feel the forest watching us. The darkness beyond our fire's reach seemed too deep, too absolute. And when the wind shifted, I caught that same sweet, wrong smell from the cave. Faint, but unmistakable. The voices started again around 11 p.m. This time, there were more of them. 3 or 4 distinct calls echoing through the trees. Men and women, all sounding distressed or urgent. They seemed to be coming from different directions, some close enough that I could almost make out words. "Do you hear that?" I whispered to Lily, who was reading a paperback novel by the fire's light. She looked up, tilting her head to listen. "Hear what?" "The voices. People calling out in the woods." She listened for another moment, then shook her head. "I don't hear anything, honey. Maybe it's just the wind." But I could hear them clearly now. A woman sobbing somewhere to our east. A man shouting what sounded like a name to the west. And underneath it all, a low murmuring that might have been conversation or might have been something else entirely. "We should help them," I said, standing up. "Someone might be lost." "Dylan." Lily's voice was gentle but firm. "There's no one out there. You're hearing things." I wanted to argue, to insist that she was wrong, but doubt crept in. The voices were so clear to me. How could she not hear them? Was I losing my mind? Having some kind of breakdown? The calls continued for another hour before gradually fading into silence. Lily went to bed, but I stayed by the dying fire, straining my ears for any sound. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I stumbled into the RV to collapse beside my sleeping wife. I dreamed of caves, endless tunnels stretching deep into the earth, filled with that sweet, rotting smell. In my dream, I was searching for something, or someone, but every passage led to dead ends or impossibly narrow crawl spaces. And always, just beyond my sight, I could hear voices calling my name. The third day brought fog. It rolled in sometime before dawn, thick and gray and absolutely silent. When I woke, our RV was completely surrounded by a wall of mist so dense I couldn't see the neighboring site 50 yards away. The world had shrunk to our small aluminum island. Weird weather, Lily commented over breakfast. She seemed unbothered by the fog, but it made me deeply uneasy. There was something unnatural about its density, the way it seemed to muffle sound and distort distance. Maybe we should stay close to camp today, I suggested. Wait for it to clear up. Don't be silly, it's just fog. We have maps and compasses. We'll be fine. But when we tried to check our hiking maps, something strange became apparent. The trails we'd walked yesterday were no longer marked correctly. According to the official park map, Old Man's Cave was half a mile east of our campground, but we'd hiked west to reach it, I was certain. The trail markers we'd followed led in completely the wrong direction. Maps can be outdated, Lily said reasonably. Or maybe we just got turned around. It happens. I pulled out my phone to check GPS, but it showed only a spinning circle where our location should be. No signal, no satellite connection. According to the device, we simply didn't exist. That's strange, Lily admitted, looking at her own phone's blank screen. The fog didn't lift. If anything, it grew thicker as the day progressed until we couldn't see more than 10 feet in any direction. The trees around our campsite were ghostly shapes, and the trail we'd entered on had completely vanished into gray nothingness. I don't like this, I said around noon, pacing the small confines of our RV. Something's wrong here. The fog, the maps, the voices. You're being paranoid again. But Lily's voice lacked its usual confidence. She kept glancing out the windows at the gray wall surrounding us. That afternoon, she decided to go for a walk. Just around the campsite, she assured me when I protested. I'll stay close. I need some air. I watched her disappear into the fog, her bright red jacket quickly swallowed by the gray. Stay where I can hear you, I called after her. I will, came her voice, already muffled and distant. I waited by the window, tracking her progress by the sound of her footsteps on fallen leaves. For several minutes, I could follow her movement, a slow circuit around our site, exactly as she'd promised. Then the footsteps stopped. Lily, I called out. No answer. Lily. Louder now, my voice swallowed by the fog. Silence. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, the mist immediately wrapping around me like cold, damp fingers. The fog was so thick I could barely see my own feet, and my voice seemed to die just inches from my lips. Lily. Nothing, not even an echo. I spent 3 hours searching, calling her name until my throat was raw. The fog played tricks on me. Sounds seemed to come from the wrong directions, distances became meaningless, and twice I nearly walked into trees I could have sworn weren't there moments before. At one point, I thought I heard her voice responding to my calls, but when I followed the sound, it led me in circles until I was completely lost. Only by following our RV's external lights was I able to find my way back to camp. The fog was beginning to thin as evening approached, but there was still no sign of Lily. She returned at sunset. I was sitting by our dead campfire, phone in hand, debating whether to call park rangers when I heard footsteps approaching through the trees. My heart leaped with relief as a figure emerged from the dissipating mist. Lily! Thank God! Where have you been? I was going crazy, but when she stepped into the light, I felt my words die in my throat. It was Lily, but wrong somehow. Her red jacket was clean despite hours in the damp forest. Her hair was perfectly arranged, not a strand out of place. And her face, God, her face. She was smiling, but it was too wide, too fixed, like a mask that didn't quite fit properly. I got a little lost, she said, her voice bright and cheerful, but I found the most amazing cave system. You have to see it, Dylan. It's incredible. A cave system? Where? I searched everywhere for you. Just past the tree line. Maybe a quarter mile. She sat down beside me and I caught that smell again, sweet and rotting, clinging to her clothes like perfume. We should explore it tomorrow. Together. I stared at my wife's face in the firelight. Something was fundamentally wrong with her expression. The smile never wavered, never shifted, and her eyes were too bright, too focused, like someone performing happiness rather than feeling it. Are you okay? I asked carefully. You seem different. Different how? The smile remained frozen in place. "I don't know, just not yourself." "I'm fine, Dylan. Better than fine. I feel wonderful." She reached for my hand, and her skin was ice cold despite the warm evening. "Don't worry so much. Everything is going to be perfect." That night, I lay awake listening to her breathe beside me, but something was wrong with the rhythm. Too regular, too mechanical, like someone consciously controlling each inhalation and exhalation. And several times, I could have sworn I heard her whispering in her sleep, but in a language I didn't recognize. When I finally drifted off near dawn, I dreamed again of endless caves and that terrible sweet smell. But this time, I wasn't alone in the tunnels. Something was following me, matching my footsteps, calling my name in my wife's voice. The fourth day dawned clear and bright, the fog completely gone. Lily woke early and immediately began preparing for our cave expedition, humming cheerfully as she packed water bottles and flashlights. "You don't seem like yourself," I said over breakfast, studying her face for any crack in that constant smile. "What do you mean?" She tilted her head at an odd angle, bird-like and unnatural. "You're so cheerful. Yesterday you were scared about getting lost in the fog. Now you're acting like nothing happened. Nothing did happen. I went for a walk and found something amazing. Why wouldn't I be happy?" I wanted to argue, to point out that she'd been missing for hours, that I'd searched frantically while she'd apparently been having a wonderful time exploring. But her smile never wavered, and something in her two bright eyes warned me to let it go. The cave she led me to wasn't marked on any map. We hiked for 20 minutes through dense forest, following what might have been a game trail or might have been nothing at all. The trees grew thicker as we walked, their canopy blocking out more and more sunlight until we moved through green twilight. "Here," Lily said suddenly, stopping beside what looked like a crack in a moss-covered hillside. The opening was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, and beyond it was absolute darkness. "This is it?" I asked, peering into the narrow entrance. The sweet, rotting smell was overwhelming here, pouring out of the cave like breath from some massive mouth. "Trust me," she said, that fixed smile never changing. "It's beautiful inside. Incredible formations, underground pools. You'll love it." Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around and walk away. The cave mouth looked like a wound in the earth, and the smell made my stomach churn. But Lily was already squeezing through the entrance, her flashlight beam dancing on wet stone walls. "Come on," her voice echoed from inside. "Don't be scared." I followed, hating myself for it. The passage opened into a larger chamber after several yards of tight crawling. I emerged gasping, my claustrophobia triggering hard despite my attempts to stay calm. The space was maybe 20 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above our heads. "See?" Lily said, sweeping her flashlight beam around the walls. "Isn't it amazing?" The formations were unlike anything I'd ever seen, twisted columns and flowing shapes that looked almost organic, as if the rock had grown rather than been carved by water. And everywhere, that sweet, cloying smell was so thick I could taste it. "It's something," I managed, fighting down nausea. "Can we go back now? I really don't like tight spaces." But we haven't seen the best part yet. She was already moving deeper into the cave, following a passage that led downward into the earth. "The pools are just ahead." I had no choice but to follow. The passage narrowed again, forcing us to crawl single file through spaces barely wider than our bodies. My breathing became shallow and rapid as the weight of rock pressed down above us. How far underground were we? How much stone lay between us and the surface? The tunnel opened suddenly into a vast chamber, so large our flashlight beams couldn't reach the far walls. Underground pools reflected our lights like dark mirrors, and the sound of dripping water echoed from unseen heights. "Beautiful," Lily whispered, but her voice sounded strange in the vast space, hollow and distorted. I swept my flashlight beam around the chamber, trying to get a sense of its size. The formations here were even more bizarre, twisted spires and flowing curtains of stone that seemed to shift and move in the dancing light. And there was something else, something that made my blood freeze in my veins. Bones. They were scattered around the pools and piled in alcoves carved into the walls. Not animal bones, human bones, yellowed with age and picked clean. Skulls grinned at us from shadowy recesses, and femurs jutted from the dark water like broken masts. "Lily," I whispered, grabbing her arm. "We need to leave. Now." But when I turned to look at her, the smile was gone from her face. Her features were slack and expressionless, and her eyes had rolled back until only the whites showed. When she spoke, her voice was layered with harmonics, as if multiple people were speaking through her mouth at once. "Welcome home, Dylan." I ran. Panic overrode everything. Claustrophobia, disorientation, the maze of passages that led back to the surface. I scrambled through the narrow tunnel on hands and knees, my flashlight beam wild and erratic, the weight of stone crushing down on me from all sides. Behind me, I could hear Lily, or the thing wearing her face, following at a leisurely pace, humming that same cheerful tune. The walls pressed closer together, forcing me to belly crawl through spaces barely wide enough for my shoulders. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into absolute darkness. I kept crawling anyway, feeling my way forward by touch, the stone scraping skin from my palms and knees. And then, impossibly, I felt fresh air on my face. I burst from the cave entrance, gasping and sobbing, rolling away from the opening and scrambling to my feet. The forest looked exactly the same, green and peaceful in the afternoon sunlight, but I knew I would never see it the same way again. I ran back to the campground, crashing through underbrush and low branches, not caring about the trail. The RV sat exactly where we'd left it, bright aluminum gleaming in the sun. Normal, safe, real. I threw our belongings into bags without bothering to fold anything, then began the process of breaking camp. The RV's system seemed more complex than before. It took me 3 tries to get the water pump disconnected and the electrical cable properly stowed. My hands shook so badly I could barely manage simple tasks. I was just finishing when I heard her voice behind me. "Dylan, what are you doing?" I spun around to find Lily standing at the tree line, looking perfectly normal. Her clothes were clean, her hair neat, that familiar concerned expression on her face. If I hadn't seen her in the cave, I might have believed she was real. "We're leaving," I said, backing toward the RV's door. "Now." "But why? We still have 3 more days." She stepped closer, and I caught that smell again. Sweet rot disguised by my wife's perfume. "Because you're not Lily." The thing wearing her face tilted its head at that same odd angle. "What do you mean? Of course I'm Lily. I'm your wife." "No." I fumbled for the door handle behind me. "I don't know what you are, but you're not my wife." "Dylan, you're scaring me. You're not making sense." It took another step forward, and for a moment the mask slipped. Just for an instant, I saw something else beneath Lily's features. Something ancient and hungry and utterly alien. I yanked open the RV door and dove inside, slamming it shut and turning the deadbolt. Through the window, I watched the thing that looked like my wife stand motionless for several minutes, that fixed smile returning to its face. Then it turned and walked back into the forest without a word. I drove out of Hocking Hills that evening, leaving tire tracks in my haste to reach the main road. The RV lurched and swayed as I took corners too fast, but I didn't slow down until I saw the lights of civilization ahead. At a truck stop in Lancaster, I pulled out my phone and called Lily's cell. It went straight to voicemail as it had for the past 2 days. I tried her sister in Cleveland, her hospital, anyone who might have heard from her. No one had seen her since we left for our camping trip. That was 3 months ago. The police searched the cave I described, but claimed they couldn't find anything matching my description. No bones, no underground pools, just a shallow shelter that went back maybe 30 feet before ending in solid rock. They suggested grief and stress had caused me to hallucinate, that my wife had probably fallen into one of the area's many gorges and been swept away by rushing water. Her body was never found. I moved out of our apartment in Columbus, unable to stand the silence and the memories. I work nights now at a warehouse in Cincinnati, trying to keep busy, trying not to think about what I saw in that cave. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving home from work, I'll see a figure standing at the side of the road. Red jacket, auburn hair, familiar smile. Always too far away to be sure, always gone when I look back. And sometimes my phone rings at 3 a.m., showing Lily's number on the caller ID. When I answer, there's never anyone there, just the sound of breathing, and underneath it, that same sweet smell carried through the phone line. I know she's still down there, in that cave that doesn't exist on any map, or something wearing her face is, waiting for me to come back to finish what we started. The thing mimics her perfectly now. I've seen it in photos on social media, posting happy updates about our wonderful camping trip, tagging friends in pictures I know I never took. Everyone thinks she made it home safely. Everyone thinks I'm the one who disappeared. Sometimes I wonder if they're right. Sometimes I catch myself checking mirrors to make sure my reflection is still there, still moving when I move. Sometimes I wake up with dirt under my fingernails and the taste of that sweet rot in my mouth. They warned us about Hocking Hills, about the voices in the caves, about people who come back different. We should have listened, but it's too late now. Whatever took my wife, whatever wears her face and speaks with her voice, it's not done with me yet. I can feel it calling sometimes, especially on foggy nights when the world goes quiet and the darkness presses close. And God help me. Part of me wants to answer. Part of me wants to go back to that cave and crawl down into the dark just to see her smile again. Even knowing it isn't really her. Even knowing what waits for me in those bone-filled chambers. Because the worst part isn't the horror of what I saw down there. The worst part is the loneliness up here, in a world where my wife never existed and I'm slowly forgetting the sound of her real laugh. Sometimes I think the cave would be kinder. Sometimes I think the thing wearing her face is right. Everything would be perfect if I just came home. Sometimes, late at night when the silence gets too heavy, I find myself driving south toward Hocking Hills. I always turn around before I get there, but each time it gets a little harder. One night, I know I won't turn around. One night, I'll drive those winding roads back to our campsite, back to that crack in the hillside that doesn't appear on any map. And I'll crawl down into the dark to join whatever took my wife's place. Because even if it isn't really her, even if it's something ancient and hungry wearing her face like a mask, it's still the closest thing to Lily I have left. And that has to be enough. It has to be.